Good evening, everyone. We're going to call our meeting to order tonight. Welcome you to our meeting. We're going to have a roll call by our city clerk, Kathy Valdez.
The record shall reflect that all members are present.
Tonight we're going to do a Pledge of Allegiance, and Cub Scout Pack 747 is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance this evening. So if everybody will rise, please.
I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic of which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. 2.
Thank you. Thank you all. Yesterday was Veterans Day, and I'd like to take this time to pay tribute to all the veterans who've so bravely served our country and to honor the dedicated troops currently serving at home and abroad. We are grateful to them for the sacrifices they've made and continue to make every day, and we also appreciate all the families and the sacrifices they make to allow our armed services out there that are protecting us and making us free to do the things we like to do every day. So in accordance with the Brown Act, I'd like to announce that as a result of convening simultaneous meetings, the members of the Buena Sanitation District will receive compensation of $147.75 for the district meeting pursuant to Buena Sanitation District Ordinance 2006-1. I'd like to remind everyone that the Vista Municipal Code requires members of the public to observe order and decorum at the meeting and to conduct themselves in a courteous manner. The ordinance was adopted to allow for public input and to facilitate city business without disruption of the meeting. Applause is appropriate for items listed under the presentation portion of our agenda only. Attendees should remain seated during the meeting, and persons needing to stand are requested to step outside the city council chambers where video and audio of the meeting are playing. This is also listed on our agenda cover sheet. And students, if there's any students here that wishing to receive credit for attending this evening's meeting, must stay for a minimum of 1 hour. However, we ask that you stay for the completion of an item rather than leaving in the middle of a discussion. When you're ready to leave, you can ask one of the sheriff deputies in the back or staff members who are back in the back of the room to sign your paper. To speak for 3 minutes on an item on the agenda, if you will fill out a speaker slip with the number of the item you want to speak on and give it to the clerk's secretary. Speaker slips are available just outside the council chambers, and the clerk's secretary is right down here. So the next is approval of the agenda by our city manager, Patrick Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. There are no changes this evening.
We have one presentation item this evening. I'd like to invite Public Works Management Analyst Leslie Webb-Blanco to the podium, and also Kuna he's our Public Works Director, to come up to the podium and to receive a proclamation declaring November 15th, 2019 to be America Recycles Day and in the city of Vista. So I'll meet them down there. Okay. Whereas America Recycles Day, which occurs every year on November 15th to raise awareness about recycling, is annually declared by presidential proclamation as part of the national Keep America Beautiful program. Whereas the City of Vista recognizes the importance of recycling and the need to reduce waste to protect and preserve our natural resources. And whereas by participating in America Recycles Day, the city hopes to engage the community in recycling activities to promote a safe and healthy environment. The city coordinates educational outreach presentations, booths, and workshops at local schools and community events to inform the public on proper ways to recycle. The city provides recycling bins at all city facilities, and the city's waste hauler provides at least one recycling bin to residents free of charge to ensure all citizens have the ability to recycle. And whereas recycling requirements are integrated into the city's municipal codes related to sewer, stormwater, and construction to divert waste. Additionally, City Council policy encourages the purchasing and use of recycled products and materials. So whereas on America Recycles Day, the city renews its commitment to reducing, reusing, and recycling waste and keeping Vista beautiful and being responsible stewards of our environment. So now, therefore, the mayor and members of the City Council do hereby proclaim Friday, November 15th, 2019 as America Recycles Day in the city of Vista. So congratulations to that. And you want to say anything? This down here. Okay, we'll do photo opportunity here. Thank you. Thank you both. Everybody recycle. With that, we'll move on to our consent calendar. The recommendations on the following consent calendar will be enacted in one motion unless an item is removed from the calendar. Any member of the public can remove an item by submitting a request to speak card to the clerk's secretary. Items removed from the consent calendar will be considered immediately following adoption of the calendar. And we have 9 consent items this evening, and I have one pulled here. Item C9 is pulled by someone out in the audience. And do I have anything here? If I don't, Councilmember Rigby.
I move that we approve the consent calendar, the balance of the consent calendar as presented.
Do I have a second on that? Okay. So please cast your votes on that. That motion passes unanimously. On that, we will go to item C9, which is the sale of city-owned property at 700 Townsite Drive.
Mayor,
So-
would you like a staff report or just to hear from the speaker?
Let's just hear from the speaker and see what his questions are first. Okay, Matt?
Yeah, the question is, how much was the sale for?
It's $205,000.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no other questions, I'd entertain a motion for that.
I'll move that we approve C9 as presented.
I'll second.
Okay, please cast your ballots or your votes. That motion passes unanimously. The next thing on our agenda are public hearings, and we have 3 public hearings this evening. Public hearing number 1, this is a public hearing to consider changes to fees and policies for recreation and community services programs and facility rentals. The public hearing is now open. Recreation and Community Services Director Theron Diekman will introduce this item.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. We're here this evening to discuss fees and policies for the Recreation and Community Services Department. With me this evening making the presentation is RCS Management Analyst Ashley Adair.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. Tonight I will be presenting our 2020 proposed fees and policy updates. Let's begin with our department's mission, which is to offer programs that build community, promote healthy lifestyles, and provide entertainment for a wide variety of audiences. The department operates many of Vista's recreation, aquatic, and cultural arts venues and hosts activities for all ages, including preschoolers, youth, adults, and seniors. Effective January 1st, the minimum wage will increase by $1, which will impact our department as we have numerous temporary and part-time employees. The estimated impact of the minimum wage increase is $102,000 department-wide. Additionally, we anticipate some increases to contracts, general market, and industry-related expenses. Before we discuss the recommended changes, I would like to provide an overview of the council-approved annual level of support for each division. For cultural arts, we have general fund support of up to $200,000. For senior nutrition, we have general fund support goal of up to $375,000. For the Wave Water Park, we have general fund support of up to $400,000. And for recreation, we have a cost recovery goal of 70%, including direct, indirect, and allocated costs. Let's begin with cultural arts. The 2020 season shows include An American in Paris, Something Rotten, Cinderella, Ragtime the Musical, and Kinky Boots. Next, we have an overview of the historical subsidy for cultural arts. We are pleased to report that we have a $0 subsidy for 2 fiscal years in a row, as our recent seasons have performed very well. The 2019 season included Producers, Matilda, West Side Story, Victor Victoria, and we plan to add a 5th show to the 2020 performance season. The Cultural Arts Division is not proposing any rental fee increases for 2020. A $2 summer season ticket fee increase is being recommended to align more closely with industry standards and budget projections, with the exception of general lawn and senior, student, and military tickets. Staff also recommends a broader range of Moonlight Presents and Club M ticket fees to foster program diversity and widen audience appeal. Here you will see the proposed $2 ticket increases for single tickets to the 2020 summer season at the Moonlight. Here we have the proposed subscription ticket fees for the 2020 summer season, which includes a newly added 5th show. And lastly, we have the proposed Moonlight Presents and Club M fees, which have been revised to promote greater program diversity and appeal to a broader range of potential audience members. Before I move on to the next division, are there any questions on the cultural arts recommended changes?
Councilmember Green, do you have a question?
Hello. I just had a question. It looks like it's a pretty significant increase in the season ticket price. Is that due to the added show, or, and have we, I mean, I know we haven't actually put it out there for sale yet, but do we anticipate it's going to have any effect on sales for season tickets? Because it looks like it's like...
Good questions.
Okay.
I'm going to defer to our cultural arts business manager,
you are.
Colleen Kohler-Smith, to answer
Here comes help.
Give us the contemporary dance you've been practicing. I'm
So
sure.
yes, that does include that 5th show. So subscribers still get the 25% discount. It's just off of 5 shows instead of 4. So they get 25% off the single ticket sales, which includes that $2 increase. And tell me what your other question was.
No, that was the biggest thing. My other thing was our subscribers. Does it sound like we're going to have a problem with ticket sales at the new prices?
We've got renewals going out now. We've been receiving great word of mouth.
Okay.
And we should know in the next month or 2.
Okay, so for now we're anticipating good news.
We also are giving patrons and subscribers a payment plan option.
Okay.
So that
makes it a lot more
will also
affordable
help.
for them. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, thank you so much for the information. I appreciate it.
And the 5th show is for the 40th anniversary, and we're going to see how successful we are. We're going to see if subscribers respond to it in a favorable manner, and then we'll determine whether we go to a 5th show in the 41st season.
So if it's not effective, we'll have this meeting again next year and possibly bring it back down to where it was.
Correct. And the foundation has increased their subsidy to help subsidize the cost of that 5th show.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, and great job, by the way, last couple of years not receiving the subsidy. On Fire, Moonlight, great productions over there.
Thank you.
Okay. So that was our last question on that. So I guess moving forward.
Okay, next we have the Wave Water Park. The Wave Water Park has operated under subsidy for the past 6 years. Here you will see a breakdown of recent subsidy amounts. General admission tickets for over 42 inches in height and happy hour only are recommended to increase by $1. Vista residents will still receive a 10% discounted ticket price. A slight decrease is recommended to the cabana rental prices. Staff have observed a decrease in rentals at the existing market rates and propose adjusting the rates to ensure rentals remain competitively priced and affordable for families. Increases are recommended to the Aqua Camp and Junior Lifeguard Program weekly fees, along with the session rate for swim class, water polo, and flow rider class. The increases are necessary to help offset the impact of the minimum wage increase. However, the prices for these programs will remain competitive and reasonable. Staff also recommends an increase to the Scout Bench program fee, Family Night and Friday Night Splash, and water polo fees to help negate anticipated program and operational increases pertaining to the statewide minimum wage mandates. Staff estimates an increase of $39,855 in revenue next season to help offset the expense increases, which are estimated at about $39,916. Before we move on to recreation programs, are there any questions on the Wave Water Park?
I don't see any questions on that.
Okay. Next, we have our recreation programs division. Staff recommends increasing recreation hourly facility rental fees for the Civic Center and Fire Station Number 5 facilities in 2020. Additionally, increases to facility rental fees for the Jim Porter Recreation Center and Thibodeau Ranch House are recommended. For recreation programs, staff recommends an approximate 5% increase to sports, with the exception of adult softball, which is already priced toward the top of the market, and a $1 increase to the early childhood education program fees. Increases to day camps, some special event fees, and Rancho Buena Vista Adobe program fees are also proposed to help mitigate minimum wage impacts and general operational expense increases. These are the first increases proposed to the aforementioned recreation programs and facility rental fees since 2018. Before we move on to the Rancho Buena Vista Adobe division, are there any questions on recreation?
I don't see any questions on that.
Moving on, we have the Rancho Buena Vista Adobe division with minimal changes for 2020. Staff currently recommends increases to the Friday and Saturday daily rental rate and Sunday through Thursday hourly rental rate for the courtyard, bridal room, kitchen, and gallery to cover minimum wage increases and general anticipated program increases. Rental costs for the Adobe facility have not increased since 2018. Before we discuss our senior services budget unit, are there any questions on the Adobe?
Any questions on the Adobe? Nope.
Next, we have our proposed changes to the senior services budget unit. Staff recommends adjusting the hourly rental rates for the Gloria McClellan Center and Park Terrace facilities in 2020. Additionally, staff propose removing the kitchen-only rental fee and associated cleaning fee for the Gloria McClellan Center, as this option was largely not feasible for or greatly utilized by renters historically. Staff also recommends the addition of a one-way van trip cost to the Out and About program to assist with compliance of grant parameters, which require a certain number of one-way trips per driver hours. One-way trips are recommended for van service only, as this vehicle type is assigned to individual rides, such as medical appointments, which can vary in length from 30 minutes to 1.5 hours. Whereas shuttle service is assigned to group shopping trips with specific times, so wait times become not applicable to the van. One-way trips will also help mitigate the amount of downtime experienced when drivers wait for passengers to return. Before we move on to our proposed policy amendments, are there any questions on senior services?
No questions. I just have a question on the senior center where it says group A, B, C, and D. What are those groups? I probably should know that, but I don't remember.
No, that's another good question. So Group A is probably our second least popular rental category. Group D is probably the least. Group A is primarily Vista residents, that's nonprofit youth organizations. Group B are non-resident, nonprofit youth organizations. Group C is Vista resident private events. And Group D is non-resident private events and a few other categories under that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Proposed changes to the Recreation and Community Services policy are as follows. Under events with alcohol, facility rentals with alcohol consumption shall be a maximum of 6 hours, up from 5, excluding setup and cleanup times. In the security section, we have removed Civic Center lobby from the list of sites excluded from site-specific security requirements, as security does apply to the lobby, as stated in Section 11 of the policy document. And in the cancellations and refunds section, we added verbiage to this section to include Brangle Terrace disc golf course rentals. Are there any questions on our proposed policy amendments?
Any questions from our council? No, seeing none.
This concludes my report and presentation. Staff are happy to answer any further questions. Thank you so much.
Councilmember Rigby.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for going through all of this. I know it's not easy to do and to look at every single fee that we charge in this department. And it's not easy for us to sit up here and talk about having to raise fees throughout the city. But when our costs go up like they have been going up and will go up again because of the state mandates, we really have to follow suit so that we do subsidize to a point already, but we have to make sure that we don't subsidize more than we can as a city in our budget. So it's really very difficult to sit up here and say, yes, we have to do this, when really I don't want to do this. But I am very grateful that there were some areas that we took a hard look at, and many areas we didn't raise any fees, and a couple of areas we reduced fees. And one of them you saw on the screen was relating to Scout program. So I do appreciate how thoroughly you went through this budget line item by line item by line item and looked at past performance to come up with these changes. So I appreciate that very, very much.
Councilmember Green.
I actually just echo everything that Councilwoman Rigby said, and with that, I move that we close the public hearing and accept staff's recommendation to approve the revisions to the Recreation and Community Services, the facilities, and also the service policies and procedures.
Do I have a second? Did somebody say something? Oh, okay, Karina, okay. Okay, please cast your votes. That motion passes unanimously. Our second public hearing is to receive testimony regarding the vacation of a public sewer easement at Robin Place. The public hearing is now open. Community Development and Engineering Director. Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
As our scout troop leaves, our Cub Pack leaves, I just want to say thank you very much, Pack 747, for being here this evening and doing our flag salute for us. You did a great job, and I will see some of you next week. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay, so we're back to the public hearing is now open. Community Development and Engineering Director John Conley is going to introduce this item.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Sarah Bottom, our right-of-way agent for the Sanitation Division, will make the presentation.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. For your consideration this evening, staff presents a resolution to vacate public sewer easements at Robin Place. The easement was originally granted to the Buena Sanitation District in 1998. The property was not developed since the easement was acquired, and no facilities are currently constructed within the easement. The property is now under new development, and the developer is not to construct a sewer main in the easement that is to be vacated. This concludes the staff's presentation. Staff and owner representative are available to answer any questions that you may have.
Do we have Councilmember Rigby?
Thank you for that report. Appreciate it very much. And with that, Madam Mayor, I would move that we close the public hearing and we approve vacating a public sewer easement at Robin Place.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, seeing a motion and a second, please cast your votes. Okay, that motion passes unanimously. That moves us on to Our next public hearing number 3. This is a public hearing to receive testimony regarding the proposal to amend Chapter 18.34 of the Development Code, the RM zone, to revise the list of uses requiring a special use permit. So the public hearing is now open, and Director Conley is going to provide the staff report.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is a recommendation by staff to amend the RM or multi-residential zone to revise the list of special uses included in the Development Code, specifically Chapter 1834-010. The amendment would add a new category to the list of special uses for one emergency shelter within the entire zone, not to exceed 60 beds where all of the following are satisfied. The shelters on a lot or commonly owned lots within an area of at least 3 acres, and the shelter will operate as an integral part of a larger existing facility which includes at least 20 transitional housing units and 20 permanent housing units, with the total number of those units at least equaling the number of beds in the shelter. These are both conditions that are met by a pending applicant, Solutions for Change, that's processing an application through the Planning Department, and this zoning amendment will allow that project to move forward. The zoning map shown here for the city of Vista, the orange areas of the RM zone, so technically the amendment would apply to all of the orange areas within that zone. However, it would only permit one shelter to be located within the entire zone. The zoning code amendment would be consistent with goals and policies in our general plan, specifically in our housing element. Goal 4 and policy 4.4 apply to providing housing for needy populations and specifically for homeless populations. The staff is also recommending inclusion of a special use permit process which would allow some discretion from the decision makers in reviewing the operational characteristics and location of that use. Zoning code amendments are at the discretion of the City Council with a formal recommendation required by the Planning Commission. Our Planning Commission reviewed this request in October of this year and recommended approval unanimously, and staff is requesting the City Council amend the list of special uses in the RM zone consistent with that recommendation. That completes my staff report. Thank you, Mayor.
Deputy Mayor Franklin.
Inclusive of the special use permit, I would make a motion that we adopt, we close the public hearing and adopt the amendment resolution that's before us, including the mandate for a special use permit.
Seeing no questions, do I have a second on that? Councilmember Contreras, did you want to say something, Councilmember?
I just wanted to ask Deputy Mayor, could you repeat the beginning of your motion again?
It's to close the public hearing and adopt the resolution. I just wanted to make sure, since staff seemed to be asking for guidance on the question of the special use permit, I wanted to make sure that it was the will of the council that the special use would be required, special use permit would be required.
That's the staff recommendation, correct.
I do have one clarifying question for Mr. Conley. And I think you clarified it, but I just want to make absolutely sure. When you say that only one would be allowed in the zone, but of course our colorful map shows multiple orange zones, you're talking one within the entire city, is that correct? Within any zone collectively?
There are other zones that allow emergency shelters by right, but this amendment would apply to the RM zone. Yes, only one within the entire city in the RM zone.
Correct. I just wanted to make sure that that was spot on. Thank you.
So I have a second by Councilmember Contreras and a motion by Deputy Mayor. So seeing no other discussion, please cast your votes. That motion passes unanimously. That takes us to our discussion items. We have 3 discussion items this evening, and the first one is D1, our strategic plan to address homelessness. Our Assistant City Manager, Ali Zimmerman, will introduce the item.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening. As you know, we're in the middle of a series of discussion items to address strategies and recommendations for a proposed strategic plan that will come before you in the next few months. I'm going to turn it over to our Housing Programs Manager, Amanda Lee, to lead the discussion of tonight's item, which is the subject of reducing homelessness.
Thank you, and good evening, Mayor and City Council members. The item before you tonight is to discuss strategies to reduce homelessness. During the presentation, staff and our consultants will provide a brief background and overview of the process to date. review potential strategies for inclusion in the strategic plan and take public comments, and request direction from you on the possible strategies to include in the homeless strategic plan. In March 2018, the City Council identified a need to develop a strategic plan to address homelessness. Following the goal-setting meeting, staff immediately recognized the importance of creating a plan that was data-driven, based on best practices, and utilizes all available resources. To accomplish this, staff released a request for proposal and selected HG Consulting to assist with the development of the plan. As the June 4th City Council workshop, staff and the consultants provided an overview of potential outcome and strategies for the strategic plan big picture focus. Based on that direction, the City Council directed staff to include the following outcomes in the strategic plan. Prevent homelessness, which was discussed on September 24th, improve quality of life, enhance community outreach and education, and legislative advocacy, which were all discussed on October 22nd, and tonight's item is reduce homelessness. Based on research and best practices, on June 4th, City Council presented the potential strategies to reduce homelessness. During that meeting, the City Council requested further information on creating a homeless outreach team, or HOT, financially supporting the county's pilot program, which is the Community Care Coordination, constructing a shelter for single males, including case management, purchasing beds in other North County communities for underserved populations, creating a downtown jobs program, which we discussed on October 22nd, and information on zones that would include tiny homes. The county's pilot program is not included in tonight's prepared presentation. As indicated in the staff report, the staff is not recommending that the city pursues the program at this time due to costs. On June 4th, you did ask for requested information on the zones that would permit for tiny homes. Tiny homes are permissible in almost any zone that allows residential use. A tiny home can be a primary structure or be used as an accessory dwelling unit. However, in many cases, most developers want to construct tiny home communities. In these scenarios, tiny homes would only be permissible in multifamily zones, including the RM zone, MU zone, and the downtown specific plan. Now, I would like to introduce Julie Dubik and Heidi Gatwork from HG Consulting, who will be providing you more information concerning the strategies to reduce homelessness.
Madam Mayor, could I ask just a technical question?
Sure. We're going to try and wait till the very end. But
well, just because you're talking about tiny houses, don't we have a minimum dwelling size as spelled out in our code?
No.
We don't.
No.
I thought we did. We're sure about that? Okay.
Maybe Ms. Zimmerman can elaborate on that, but I believe tiny homes, or a tiny home is allowed on a lot in Vista.
Yeah, and typically the zones will say how large the structure can be as it relates to setbacks and the property size, but it doesn't say how small it can be. The second unit, an accessory unit, may have something on it, but...
And apartments typically have in certain zones where you have to have a minimum size of a unit of 550 square feet or so on. But for tiny homes, and would actually also defer to Community Development Director John Connolly provide more information. But from what we understood, that a tiny home is permissible in any residential use.
And Mr. Connolly's coming down, probably.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of us that were interested by this idea. As I've admitted before, I love the tiny house TV. Can't get enough of it. I think there's a couple of other council members that think, there's probably people that think it's a cool idea. So, what of it? Isn't there am I wrong? There's not a minimum size for structures?
We do have minimum unit sizes that apply to single-family and multifamily units. They're in our development code. We have had a lot of issues with them because of projects that want to build smaller units. The staff has made a recommendation to allow some discretion in those minimum unit sizes at the Planning Commission or City Council in a public hearing for a development application. And so that recommendation will be coming forward to the council here soon. But the way it's written right now, there are some specific minimum unit sizes that are required.
That's what I thought. Thank you for clarifying that.
But like I said, we're going to bring the amendment back. So
sounds good.
Thanks.
Okay, good evening. So as Ms. Lee said, we're going to talk about reducing homelessness tonight. And before we get into a recommendation, we wanted to talk about sort of the definition of reducing homelessness. We're not calling it ending homelessness. Reducing homelessness is the term that is used internationally. And basically what is meant by that is making homelessness a rare, brief, and one-time experience. We're not going to end homelessness, but we can hopefully make it very rare, and we can make it very short, and have people that do not fall back into homelessness repeatedly. And that is the goal of the interventions that we're going to be talking about tonight. When we talk about some of the things that entails, there's a number of sort of principles of reducing homelessness. One is, and this is a challenge, is identifying and engaging with particularly chronically homeless people who are resistant to that kind of engagement. And we have talked about that in other meetings. There are people who are really resistant to that connection and that relationship and resist going into treatment or services. One of the things that is necessary is, to provide access to low-barrier emergency shelter or other temporary accommodations. That's a term that's often used for that is bridge housing or supportive housing or emergency housing. How do you get those people off the streets, and having some options for that. Another issue is providing people with crisis services, right? So immediate needs, and providing that without barriers, without hoops to jump through, helping them to navigate some of the challenges in getting access to services, and ultimately assisting people moving into housing as quickly as possible, and to do that in a very individual way. The folks that are chronically homeless, that are on the street, have they have very significant issues. And so dealing with them on a one-on-one basis has proven to be a best practice in addressing those issues. And this all comes from the International Council on Homelessness, is used across the state and across the country. If we look at the next slide, so these principles are in this pyramid of the things that we think are important to address in a homelessness plan for Vista. If you look at that bottom of the pyramid, the foundation of the pyramid, that's really two of those principles. So that's, first of all, identifying individuals, and it's not just identifying, it's building relationships with them so that they become more open. And in general, many of the chronically homeless folks on the street will not respond the first time you approach them. And they often do not respond to law enforcement necessarily. So finding ways to engage them, to build relationships over multiple touches, and that relationship building and trust building has proven to be the most effective for chronically homeless folks. And then also connecting them to services, so having a referral network available, having the knowledge, the connections, and the manpower and the time and resources to make those connections, to get people into those available services. Getting them into some sort of shelter or bridge housing is important to ultimately getting them off the street and reducing the cost and the burden on the city. And finally, and this would be something that partner organizations would undertake, is how do you get them out of those bridge shelters and not back on the street, but into permanent and stable housing. And the way that we are looking at this in our recommendations is that those bottom two are where we believe there are steps that Vista can take as part of its plan to address homelessness. And that top level, that sort of tip of the pyramid, is something that would happen through the strengthened connections with partners. Social service agencies, MHS, other providers would be doing the work of housing navigation for the folks that would enter those services. And sometimes right off the street, you can move them into more stable housing. So the first recommendation we want to talk about is a HOT team. Now, we have a law enforcement team that is focused on homelessness. We are suggesting that you expand that team and include a social worker. And in fact, we would suggest, assuming that the budget is available, which at this point we think it may be, that you have 2 social workers, because there is a lot of work for these folks to be doing. There are a lot of folks to be contacting, and the work of navigation for these individuals is time-consuming and resource-intensive. So the strategy here is to have a contracted social worker, or 2, and they would be full-time employees. They specifically trained. Mental health and addiction are huge issues, as we have discussed multiple times. These folks would have special training in mental health and addiction, and would also be deeply connected to all of the services wrapping around Vista and North County that deal with mental health and addiction. And that would include up to and including conservatorship, which was recently approved as a tool by the county. People who are dealing with chronic, severe mental illness and severe addiction, who are seriously involved with law enforcement over time, who are not able to care for themselves, there is that option. These social workers could help engage with that conservatorship program. It's rare, but it is something that is now an option in Vista. We believe, and we have spoken with the VA, we have spoken with the VA Homeless Program Coordinator, and it is our belief, and not our belief, our understanding that there are many services available for veterans. The challenge, and they're very excited about working with Vista, has been connecting to the homeless veterans in Vista. They have really struggled to do that, and we would look for the social workers who had experience working with veterans and also establish those relationships and an objective as specifically working with veterans to make sure that they get connected to those services. And the VA has indicated to us that they would be very interested in that sort of relationship. Finally, these social workers, there are many different services that they provide, and I want to just talk for a moment about what hot teams do, because they're all over the country. But we talk about outreach and housing navigation. It's also helping with documentation. People don't have any identification or any documentation, so that's a barrier to services. They don't know how to get to referrals. They may have transportation issues. All of these things are barriers to accessing services. These are all things that housing navigator, these social workers can do. In addition, when they're not actually out on the street, they're working to build relationships with service providers and doing a lot of that work. Just as a sampling of some of the places that have hot teams, if we look around the country, many places in Florida, Sarasota, Hillsbury, Broward County, Houston, Denver, Seattle, Colorado, and that's, there are many others. In California, Santa Monica, San Mateo, Marin, Vegas, actually, it's not California, but it's close, has a really new and successful hot team. And locally, Escondido has put a hot team in place. National City has a form of a hot team in place. Obviously, San Diego has a hot team in place, and Oceanside. And Oceanside, in fact, found their first year, which with 2 social workers so successful, they've now doubled, and they now have 4 social workers that are working with their hot team. So these are all distinct versions. They all have sort of different, slightly different iterations, but all of them have social workers and social service partnering with law enforcement to really address the issue of chronic, unsheltered homeless. Just a couple of facts about what some of these hot teams have been able to accomplish. In Florida, one of the hot teams that in Sarasota found that they had 10,000 contacts over the first couple of years with those who are homeless. They found 30% they were able to move into housing of the people they contacted. Another 39%, that was permanent housing. Another 39% went into either permanent or temporary housing. Oceanside had success in family reunification. Their social workers were able to reunify 48 people last year with their families. National City has moved some people into shelters and treatment facilities. Vegas has 147 people that they contacted. They had 800 accept services out of several thousand that they contacted, and 147 of those in their first year now self-sustaining and housed. Santa Monica had similar, they had 14 linked to community resources. This was within a few months of the first 300 people they contacted. 8 were in medical care, 3 in mental health care, 7 placed in housing, and this was in the first few months of those services. Houston also had about 200 people housed after they launched their program. So the police, the police union also wrote about hot teams, and they felt that there were a lot of benefits to this, including decreasing police calls for service, reduction in tax dollars. They talked about some of the significant reductions in healthcare costs. The average yearly cost of a homeless person around $30,000 to a city, and if you get them into some sort of housing through these partners, it can go down to about $12,000. And this was from them. It also can reduce litigation. Because you have these relationships formed and hopefully moving people into service, decreasing homeless arrests and incarceration. So there's a lot of reasons why the police unions also want to support this. So that is basically the recommendation around the hot team, and that could be in place serving people fairly quickly. So, and then Julie's going to talk you through the next recommendation.
So building, building on the work that your HOT team, especially augmented with a social worker or 2 social workers, can do, once you've made that contact and you've been able to establish some trust, there has to be some place to locate or house the person as you're able to get them off the street. What most communities have done is either find some type of shelter, emergency shelter, bridge shelter, it's all the same term, or they've been able to rent beds from an existing shelter. That process can also help communities both with quality of life issues as well as enforcement issues. Because if you do have a location, a bed or otherwise, for someone on the street, if that's available and the person declines it after being reasonably offered it, your anti-camping laws could then be enforced. But you have to have available placement. So it covers a wide range of options of both quality of life, getting people off the street who have made contact with your social worker, as well as beginning to allow the community, should so desire, to enforce its anti-camping and other enforcement obligations. So as you can see, there are, and there's been some discussion, there are areas in the community where an emergency shelter could be located, and there are partners and other ways to partner in terms of if you were to make a capital investment in a shelter. There are also places where you could rent a bed. That is more limited because most of the shelters are full. The issue here really is shelters that will be low barrier and accommodate single men and women, particularly single men, because when you're dealing with a chronic homeless, that is the vast majority of your population. So 2 shelters are identified on the slide. The availability of beds in the shelters is limited, but the cost is $53 a night, or about $19,000 annually. And these issues, should we get direction from council, can be explored in depth and tied down. We've talked to the shelters, and a number are willing to talk about some type of arrangement or to consider putting some kind of bridge shelter into Vista, which would then allow your HOT team to have a place to take people or to be in a position to move someone who refuses to take a bed. So at this point, we have basically covered what we want to cover in this presentation, and then we want to come back and get direction from the council. Our suggestion is that we take public comment, and then we'll come back to take direction.
I have 3 speakers. Okay, we'll do that. We'll call the speakers, and then we'll take direction. Okay, Cheryl Keck was first, followed by Paul Webster, followed by Katie Melendez.
Good evening, I'm Cheryl Keck. You have become familiar with me. I've been a Vista resident for 27 years.
Talk right in the microphone so we can hear you well, okay? Can you do that? Just talk, speak right up so we can hear you.
I've been a Vista resident for 27 years, and for the past 4.5 years, I've lived in my vehicle due to a fallout with a former employer, not necessarily my doing. Now, medical issues have been being assessed. My doctors have caused delays. Other legal issues. My mom died a couple of years ago. That caused delays. I'm now trying to get back on my feet with only pennies left in the bank. One of the things that did help me in the past, before becoming homeless again in 2015, is that a woman took me into her home. She gave me a room. My bed was made out of boxes. My desk was made out of boxes. My cubby holes were for my clothes were made out of boxes. I got myself back into school, got another job, and was renting rooms around Vista. I was doing good. But then a former employer, again, there are issues not necessarily connected with drugs and mental illness. There are other issues that cause people to become homeless and not be able to gain a foothold back into the income world. I've not had people say, here, go here, I go here, and I get here. You want a purse? No, I need help. But for almost 5 years, I've not received that help, even though people say it's there. I do not qualify as a drug addict, as an alcoholic, as mentally ill. I do not have dependent children, but I do fall under a victim of domestic violence that I have survived for 4 years, that I was laughed at by our very own San Diego County Sheriff's Department, by individuals. It made me angry, upset, and disturbed. I love these guys. I want to love them more, but they do not seem to love me back. I do my best to help my community with the issues with homelessness, because I can survive in my car. I do not want to see the death, the destruction, the drug circles that people that have become my friends, that help me, people that actually help me, that everybody looks down on. They're good people. They deserve it. But those issues are drug issues. Those issues are mental illness issues. They're not necessarily homeless issues, like some of us are experiencing. You know, I only know how to defend myself. But please think about people who do not fall into these categories that everybody's talking about.
Thank you. Paul Webster, followed by Katie Melendez.
Good evening, members of the council and Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much for the public hearing zoning change on behalf of Solutions for Change. We appreciate it. The City of Vista should avoid getting stuck in a quagmire of exploding costs, low outcomes, and increased litigation because it feels it should do something on homelessness. It should resist the enticement of state money that comes with strings, a history of poor performance, and no consideration for Vista values and sense of community. It should recognize the failed strategies employed by larger cities with larger budgets and turn them aside. Vista should utilize the many faith and community-based organizations with experience in serving the homeless to craft its own programs that are within its budget and that demonstrate outcomes, not the provision of services. The fact is that addressing homelessness is not the role of municipalities. It's too complicated and too expensive, and few jurisdictions have actually seen reductions in homelessness based on their activities. In San Francisco, the unsheltered continue to rise, up 17% to 8,011 in 2019 from 2017. No other American city has built as many units of affordable housing per capita. From 2004 to 2014, the city spent $2 billion on 3,000 units of permanent supportive housing, and yet the crisis continues to escalate. In November of 2016, Los Angeles voters approved a $1.2 billion bond measure to finance housing construction, mostly for long-term homelessness. After 3 years, the homeless population has increased by 12% to nearly 60,000 in LA County and by 16% to more than 36,000 in Los Angeles. The strategies and approaches that have resulted in San Francisco and Los Angeles' failure are the same strategies recommended here. In fact, the Los Angeles Controller's Office, when doing an audit on the very outreach strategies that were recommended today, show a result of 6%, only 6% of those outreached going into receiving some kind of substance abuse treatment. 4% receiving mental health treatment. This is not a successful path to follow, but is a path of failure and a path of expense and a path of increasing obligations by the taxpayers of Vista. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Katie Melendez.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Katie Melendez. I am a social worker here in Vista and a lifelong Vista resident. I wanted to talk a little bit about the concept of a hot team. As a social worker, I have gone out throughout the county and worked in several of these hot teams, and I think that they can be very effective. But I know that Vista wants to do its very best to develop a team and to develop programming that's going to be most effective. So what I really do like about hot teams is that they're trauma informed. A lot of the folks who are sleeping outside or experiencing homelessness, when they have encounters with law enforcement, it can become very triggering and traumatizing, and it can sometimes become fatal. And so we want to try to avoid those kinds of interactions and maybe include some social worker interactions with the people who are sleeping outside, because that way they can get those mental and behavioral health needs met. I also like the idea of it building rapport in the community. One of the values that was instilled in me growing up in Vista is that we look out for one another. And I really like the idea of the city of Vista spearheading a project that captures that value, that we look out for our neighbors and we look out for our fellow Vista residents. Something that I think could be improved regarding a hot team is it might be plausible for a social worker to link a client or link an encounter, right? Someone who's staying outside, link them to services like a shelter, right? Maybe help them get their ID, help them get linked up to drug and alcohol rehabilitation services. But there's a lot of resources that are lacking in our community when it comes to those who are chronically homeless and some of the folks that are most vulnerably homeless. Folks like veterans with really complicated PTSD and history issues, folks who are elderly, right? Really vulnerable populations. Sometimes it's not enough to put them in shelter and then expect them to be able to rent a room on their Social Security. Things like permanent supportive housing is important to stock as a city because we have community members who need that resource. It's not for everyone. It's not for every single person who's experiencing homelessness, but it's an important resource to have for when those encounters happen that won't be solved with a trip to rehab and an ID, right? It's going to take a little bit more. And so I want to see the city of Vista invest in those resources that are going to help our most vulnerable. Thank you.
Thank you. And that is the end of our speakers. We just had the 3 speakers. So with that, I guess we need to help. They're looking for direction from us. So if anybody has any comments, I'd be happy to. Deputy Mayor Franklin.
Could you tell us more about how conservatorship that you talked about would work?
There's a number of legal hoops to jump through, but a petition is filed and it has to be approved by a number of layers, and then someone can be involuntarily committed to put into a treatment facility. And up until now, it's had to be voluntary. You can't force someone into that kind of treatment program. And that started in San Francisco. They are experimenting with that. It passed the San Francisco City Council, and it has recently passed here in the county as a tool that would be used. And it's hard to get it through. It's really only in the most egregious cases, but people who have repeatedly had the police called on them, who are unable to care for themselves, who are a danger to themselves or others, and severely mentally ill or substance abusing.
And was that a change in state law that allowed this tool to be used here?
Yeah, and the county just approved it very recently, and San Francisco just last year, I believe. So it's quite recent.
Does the city of Vista need to take a proactive action in order to avail itself of the use of this tool?
No, it's now available throughout the county. It passed in Sacramento by everybody voted for it except I think one assembly person, which is unusual considering it's involuntary conservatorship. And then San Francisco was the first city-county, they're together, to actually adopt the involuntary conservatorship. And as Heidi has said, there are a series of hoops that have to go through it. The only group that says they may oppose it is the ACLU. There hasn't been a case come up yet. And then the county a couple weeks ago, our county, a couple weeks ago, also adopted the change in law that you refer to. So there isn't anything else you need to do, but a trained social worker would really be in the position to know those regulations and then be able to identify someone who was extreme enough to be a candidate for involuntary conservatorship.
That takes me into my next question about the social worker or workers that we're talking about hiring. So if Oceanside's got 4 of them on their staff, when could we have an opportunity for the council to visit with 1 or more of those social workers so that we can hear firsthand from them?
We could certainly contact Oceanside and set something up.
Yeah, I'd be willing to make a trip over there and have as many council members that would want to join me. I think it's important if we're going to field a brand new position that we understand what some of the personal ground level experiences are of somebody doing that job in another city. So I think that would be really important. You know, I do just want to repeat a fact that I believe to be true. There is no exhaustive list of categories that people who are experiencing homelessness fit into. We all know that. We all believe that. I want the community to understand that myself and the council understands that there is no exhaustive list of categories, but we have certainly not done enough to understand the major categories that individuals experiencing homelessness fall into. And so it is important that we attempt to think in the way any data scientist would. And the first way a data scientist thinks about a large number of individuals is by creating some categories, understanding that not everybody's going to fit into them. Are you familiar with the Doe Fund in New York City?
No.
So I would implore everybody to watch on Netflix The Pursuit, which is an Arthur C. Brooks documentary. I think they spend about 10 minutes talking about the Doe Fund. I looked at it as almost the solutions for change for single men, and we had talked about an ambassador program for our downtown. This is a program that takes men off the streets and gives them their first job for 6 months. Alpha Project, when it was still selling newspapers, would bring men into their program and they would sell newspapers. This program is to give them the opportunity for, I think it was the first 6 months, to be a part of cleaning up the community. And we're spending all this money doing creek bed cleanouts and policing and trash policing our downtown. One of the other things they do is they give these individuals a nice new uniform to wear, brand new pair of sneakers, clean appearance to go out in the community and represent their organization, which receives some kind of funding from the city to do trash cleanup. But this organization, the Doe Fund, is really focused on what is, I think, the central principle that so many have missed, which is the idea that all work has dignity, and that in order for somebody to be repaired as a human being who may have found themselves broken in some way and therefore became homeless, those who are capable of work need to be given the opportunity to work so that they can rebuild their sense of self-worth. And it was pretty powerful. If you watch this film called The Pursuit, when you hear people, and this is Solutions really focuses on this. They focus on giving people meaningful work that they can, it's stuff that's within their capability, they can be trained for. But then this organization, the Doe Fund, they moved folks out of cleanup and onto other jobs and into job training and other programs, and really helped them find work that would be suitable to them long term. So it was really about how to rehabilitate people into the workforce. I don't know if I'm 100% sold on the ambassador program until I think about pairing it with a program like this. No knock on the Alpha Project. I've spoken to the folks at the Alpha Project. I've visited some of their facilities, but we haven't had as close a relationship with them as maybe we could or should have had in recent years. And maybe that's shame on me, or I don't know who's to blame for that. But and I don't know if they're the right organization. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But it's very important to me that we are thinking about the perspectives of the organizations that we bring in, and do they focus on not reusing the same broken ideas that have gotten us into these problems, but do they focus on the kinds of transformative change for individuals that will yield true long-term results? That's very important. I certainly like the idea of putting our toe into the single male shelter by renting some rooms, if there are any to be had. The idea of renting some to begin with and seeing how that goes, and then later being able to expand the program, certainly to me seems like the correct way to proceed cautiously. I'm not so sure about the cost estimates, because even at 10, that breaks down to $1,612 per month per bed. And I understand there's significant staffing costs, and that's where the money's going. I get that. But then when you get up to 50, that number's got to get smaller, because the real estate costs get cheaper and the manpower is divided over a greater number of beds. So
Yeah, the manpower isn't really, because depending on the number, it's all ratios, right? So there's incremental increases, but if you have 10 people, you need a certain number of social workers. If you need 20, it just keeps going on,
right,
staffing-wise, so it's not.
But when the lights are off at night, there's only so many people required to be on site as staff. There's some scaling there.
There's some scaling, but not as much as you might hope, I think, is
not
what
the same.
I would argue. Yeah.
Anyway, I'm just saying, I think, and one of the things that I wanted to broadly say about our homeless master plan is we have talked a lot and we've given some direction, and I am deeply concerned because I am confused about one thing, which is the extent to which we are going to proceed to implement, Mr. Johnson, some of these programs without having given specific shape and definition. And there are issues here that I care deeply that as this council member, and I think every member of this council, we desire to be intimately involved in the shaping of each of these policies. I believe there are at least 3 of us here that do not desire to delegate based solely on the information we're giving you in this plan. And so before each of these individual plans, I don't know how many we're up to now. We've talked about a dozen concepts, most of them with a price tag attached. I, as one council member, do not want to see even one of these concepts implemented until there is better definition of the policies that will go along with it and a better understanding of what the accountability metrics are. I don't know if we're all on that same page. Maybe we are. But I'd like somebody to speak to that, and I'd like the other council members to speak to it, because each of these programs deserves an opportunity for the council to shape the policies that they're going to be implemented according to. These are all really important. They're all expensive, and they're all going to be scrutinized in the extreme by our community, as well they should. And so I want to have the opportunity to scrutinize them in advance. So I'd like to hear what say the staff and consultants and my colleagues.
I would say to that, and obviously we'll talk about the next steps later when we're done with this item, or as we get closer to being done with this item. But we'll take the direction from the city council. So if the city council wants to do more scrutinizing of the draft plan that comes before you, then we can certainly do that. It just means that there'll be obviously more work to do on that end and delayed implementation. And we are very conscientious about the money. If the city council wishes to expend the monies from the state, to be able to utilize those during the year that we're granted them. But certainly we'd plan to bring you back a draft plan for have that conversation and your direction with it to determine the level of scrutiny that you want at that time.
I have been made aware of only one spending opportunity that has some kind of a finite timeline attached to it. And so if, as I have said behind closed doors, if there is a finite timeline attached to that single opportunity, then perhaps we ought to bring that one back first. But, you know, I have asked for some basic stuff. We've been talking about this idea, the one you're referring to, the rapid rehousing funds. We've been speaking about this for, I don't know, 90 days plus, or has it been longer, 120 days, 180 days now? We have asked for some definition about the counseling that will accompany it. We've asked some basic questions like how many times would you be eligible for it? You know, we've asked for some basics.
I understand that, and as we work through those phases, we're getting your direction, and then we're going to come back to you, though, in January with the draft plan with detail, and if it doesn't rise to the level of detail that the city council wants, we'll be happy to spend more time and provide you more detail at that
Okay,
point.
I appreciate that. Yeah. That's the information I didn't have, and I just didn't know if we were going to get to where this thing's operational based on mere direction in this plan or not.
No. The draft plan will come before you, anticipated in January.
Okay.
And then we will get your feedback on that.
I needed to make that clear because that's important. So that's all I've got right now.
Councilmember Contreras.
All right. Thank you so much for all the work that you've been doing to bring forward to the council different strategies for both short-term and long-term solutions that are community-based. I do have some questions regarding the renting of beds. Now, when I was looking at the time utilization for the beds, it doesn't seem like there is that much room for us. Given the historical data that we have on time utilization for these two specific shelters, that are outlined here, the New Haven in Escondido and Catholic Charities in Carlsbad. How many beds would you anticipate that we would be able to secure on an annual basis?
The best we can come up with at this point is probably 5. And it's not, doesn't sound like a big number. I grant you that, but it would be 5 more than you have now. There are no beds for single men or women in Vista at this time. It may be that we can squeeze 1 or 2 more out of that, but again,
there's not that much room to squeeze things out, right?
There really isn't, and
yeah.
We want to be very transparent about this. Mm-hmm. These shelters are full, and there aren't a lot of low barrier single men and women opportunities out there, but it could be a way to, as you say, dip your foot into this issue. And also, if we're going to do all this work with the HOT team, that social worker is going to need some kind of opportunity to place someone single someplace off the street. And right now, you don't have that opportunity.
So what about in a scenario where, say, there's a council majority and we end up crafting some kind of policy that allows for us to rent X amount of beds? Let's just go with 5. And say our HOT team is out and they're interacting with these individuals and the social workers there, and we know that the amount of beds that we are renting are full. What is the scenario? How does that play out as far as law enforcement as well?
You mean if we've used the 5 spots already?
Correct.
Well, you've raised exactly the difficulty in 5 beds, but this process is generally not that rapid. So the idea would be that once someone gets into a place where they can connect with services, whether we're calling it a rental bed for lack of a better word, where they can connect with services, then those places then begin to look for either permanent supportive housing or some type of other housing so they can be moved on and that bed could become open again.
But the other thing I would add, though, on a day where you know that you have no spots available, you might have to change your enforcement strategy on that day, right? I mean, your social workers are aware of what's available. You have to have a bed available to enforce the anti-camping ordinance. If you don't have a bed available, that information has to be communicated and has to be known.
And how quickly would we be able to access that data, right, and have that information readily available for the HOT team? Is that something that, would be accessible, like on an app, or
in terms of what beds were available?
Correct.
Yeah, that would be the responsibility of the social worker. Would be checking that on a daily basis. You have to know what's available.
Okay, so there's flexibility in knowing exactly how many beds are available at any given time, which would coincide with law enforcement strategies.
And this is going on now at shelters, so they know what beds they have available. They know if they're going to have a bed available because the need is out there, so they want to have them filled as quickly as possible. You get the word out so people come. Sometimes people just come themselves to that shelter because the word gets out there if you have a social worker or someone who knows about your services getting the word out. And
now, could this individual just say they're from Vista, or would there be some kind of identification process? I'm ignorant of the process, which is why I'm asking the questions. So what would that interaction look like?
Right. So you mean if somebody just showed up and
they're like, "Hey, I'm from Vista.
Resident, I heard they have 5 beds."
Yeah.
It's an excellent question, and to Councilmember Franklin's point, all of the details of this has to be worked out. But what we believe is that the shelters would be working directly with the social workers and the HOT team. That there would be a relationship built and a sort of intake that is done through that method.
And we would clarify that in whatever scope of services we have with the rental agreement with one or both shelters, how they would communicate that information on a daily basis to the service provider so that we are armed and equipped with the correct information.
I definitely think that there's probably a majority on this council that would like to be very involved in crafting that, the specific guidelines. Now, we discussed about single men, and in my personal experience, overwhelmingly the individuals that I encountered during the point in time count were single men. So I think that, being able to rent, even if it's just starting with a few beds, to address the issue that we know is prominent, I think that would be a really good thing. So I'm 100% in favor of that. Now, when we're looking at constructing a temporary or permanent shelter in C2 or C3, so that would be by right, in those zones that there would be a shelter that would be able to be built there. Is that correct? Who are we talking about? Who's going to fund the construction? Is that coming from the city? Is this a partnership that is anticipated where the city helps to fund the program on an ongoing basis? What does this look like?
So it would be multiple sources. The city would not be able to build the entire thing and fund its operations. The organizations such as Interfaith or Solutions or all of these Alpha Project, the Catholic Charities, they raise money in addition to fund. Many of these shelters are part of the Alliance for Regional Solutions. They have the shelter network. There's collective fundraising that is done to support those shelters, and part of it would be the city paying some of the operational costs, as you do now for Operation Hope and for other shelters that are in the city. But there would be private donations, there would be grant applications. I would assume there would be federal and there would be state grant applications in addition to some city funding.
So it'd be a very long-term project with a lot of different moving pieces.
You might be able to get it started fairly quickly.
It depends upon whether you do something that's more temporary, like you set up a tent. These tents are not tents like we're camping with, I'm sure you know. They're elaborate structures, but they go up quickly. Alpha Project's probably one of the better known operators of these tents. The ones in San Diego, for example, were funded by 3 private funders who also did fundraising, but they were funded by individuals and a foundation. I shouldn't say just individuals who contributed to a foundation, and they were up within a couple of months. So there's a continuum of that kind of structure, some kind of temporary structure, or some kind of permanent structure. Obviously, the permanent structure is the most lengthy, not necessarily the most costly, but the most lengthy. And then it's size. Do you start with one for 10? That doubles the amount of beds we're theorizing that you could rent. So that's another factor in this.
And are these discussions that the city is already conducting with potential partners to go in this direction? So we would be starting from
not specifically, but in our conversations, you will hear from nonprofits or other philanthropists who have said, if you're going to do this, we'd like to support it. But we have not engaged in any specific conversations with any direction.
So you would want direction from the council as to whether or not we would like to pursue a temporary or permanent shelter option in C2 or C3 zones.
Correct.
Okay. I would be in favor of that. I think we need to take a look at it. So I don't know if there's a majority on that, but I'm 100% in favor of reviewing the possibility of having a temporary or permanent shelter in either one of these 2 zones. Now, moving on to, so I have a few things about the homeless outreach team. Now, looking at a social worker costing about $100,000, what is the funding source for? Is that coming from our affordable housing?
Yeah, funding is available through affordable housing or SB2 dollars.
Okay. And the SB2 dollars we anticipate to be ongoing in the amount of, what is it, $350,000?
That is correct.
And affordable housing is annually in the amount of $250,000?
That is correct.
Okay. So with the affordable, we definitely have the funds to do that, but if we were to go with this option, it would significantly reduce the funds for us to pursue other options as well. So, I would be in favor of, I think it is extremely important to have a really good outreach team, and we have seen, contrary to some people's beliefs, but we have seen significant strides with some of the hot teams. So I would be in favor of having a robust outreach. I think it's absolutely necessary, especially when we know that some individuals are going to require multiple touches before any help is accepted. And that's for a variety of reasons that I don't want to sit up here and litigate. But we know that to be true. I would be in favor of 1 social worker. I would not be in favor at this moment for 2 social workers. I think that taking a look at how this actually plays out would be important. And if there were a need for a second social worker, I believe that's something that the council could address in the future and review, but I would be in favor of having 1 social worker. Now, this social worker, is this someone that will be a direct hire, or is this a contract?
We would recommend a contract employee.
Okay, and as a contract employee, are we able to, I know that there was discussion when we were looking at a housing coordinator. I think that was it when we were looking at the home share. But would the social worker is that something that we're able to share costs among cities, or because of the caseload, is that not something that would be feasible?
I believe you could share costs, but we would recommend having it be exclusive to Vista initially, so that we can focus on a robust program in our community over time. And with the data, we can always evaluate changing the process.
And this social worker would be the one in charge of basically connecting all the dots of the different programs that are out there. As was mentioned, the VA is interested in having some more conversations, so they would really be the point person, correct, to be doing all of that work. Now, I know one of the things that we have requested over and over again, probably ad nauseum, but data. And so how is that addressed? Do we need to hire a data scientist? Do we have that capability in-house? How are we actually going to measure and have a good methodology to measure outcomes?
I just want to add just one thing, because you raised some really good questions in there, and that in our many conversations with the Sheriff's Department, who do a great job, they are very interested in having a social worker and very welcoming to that concept. So there is a lot of work out there that indicates it softens the law enforcement view and helps to get people off the street, but it is in conjunction with law enforcement, and your sheriffs here are very interested, and we've run all this by them.
It's really good to know.
Just so you know that.
Thank you. I appreciate that point.
Right. Data collection, we have heard that, and we have heard it since the first meeting. It's obviously very important. There are a number of ways to approach that, and that will be part of the plan. There may be a sort of an evaluation consultant that brings in. There may be ways to do that in-house. We're looking first at ways to do that in-house. Also, the social workers are responsible for collecting data on who they talk to. The HOT team will have specific outcomes, and I rattled off some of those statistics to you. All of these HOT teams have outcomes that they are trying to accomplish, and they're looking at those numbers on a regular basis and would have to report up on those as well.
And would the social worker, be utilizing the Clarity platform, or is that completely outside?
Most social workers they all use the community of care system as well, and that's how they would know what shelter beds are available, because they all speak to each other. But also the social worker, like Heidi and Julie had mentioned, would not go out every day out and do outreach, because the COPS team does not go out every single day. So the days they wouldn't be going out, they would be in-house, completing data, closing, reaching out, creating networks. So it's continuous full service for Vista for a full time, but they're not always out there. They're also able to compile that data and do their work as well.
And you probably know, because we've had this discussion, that the COPS team is not collecting data right now, and we don't have the data. So this is something they really are interested in too, because we haven't been able to get data out of them because they haven't really been collecting it in a way they would like to also.
Yeah, because I know we're very interested in being able to measure whether or not something's successful, and data obviously is crucial to that, and having a consistent methodology is, right there at the core. And one final question, I want to jump back because I forgot to ask this question when I was asking about the shelter and temporary shelter. Now, when we're looking at renting beds, these are significant distances, not super far, but is this something, say we had those 5 beds, we encounter an individual that's experiencing homelessness, they're ready to go to the shelter. In a previous discussion, we discussed a van that would be driving around, taking people places. Is that how we would get the individual to that shelter, or would that be done via law enforcement?
No, it would actually probably be neither. The van is a separate program that would be trying to get people to a day outreach navigation center. When we're talking about getting someone into a shelter component, what the recommendation that will come with the strategic plan is that this HOT team led by the social worker would also have access to flex funds, where they could provide a taxi voucher, or perhaps the social social worker has another network of private transportation that they would be using to connect it. So we would be putting that again through the social worker, but giving them some flexibility and funding to make sure that the people get to where they need to get.
And I know it might be a little premature, but do we have an anticipated amount that we would need to provide in flex funding for something like that? Because we're going to have to, probably say yes or no to something like that. So
the $100,000 includes the flex funding,
okay.
and so that's inclusive of that, and that was based on budgets that were provided through Escondido, Oceanside, and Carlsbad, and they all have, and that includes full service flex funding.
Thank you for that point of clarification. I was not aware that the $100,000 also included flex funding. With that, I feel like I've taken over the mic for enough time, so I will turn it over to my colleagues. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you all for the work that you're doing.
Okay, before I go on, I just have a question. Doesn't Operation Hope, do they take in single women? Do they? I think they take families, but they also take single women.
But they're a high barrier shelter.
And they have 5 beds, I believe.
And they are full all the time. So some of the mental illness and addiction issues that we're talking about are not suitable for Operation Hope.
Okay. All right. So, well, and I'm in favor of a hot team, the social worker. I would be in favor of that, but I would not be in favor of a shelter, another shelter. So, because I've been through those shelters for many years, I've been here. We used to do that every year, the emergency shelters, and I would not be in favor of another one. So I will move on to Councilmember Green.
All right. Thank you guys all so much for the presentation and the data and all the answers you're giving. I really like getting informed and getting more information on this subject. So thanks so much for that. In regards to the 2 questions that you have here, develop a full scope hot team that is led by a full-time social worker. I like the idea. I also like starting small. However, I do agree with Deputy Mayor Franklin that I don't want to hire anybody until I meet a current hot team social worker to just kind of tell me what her job is, what type of success she's had. Obviously, if her success numbers are at the 6% and 4%, it's going to be a little discouraging, but I'd really like to know exactly what she's doing, how she's using resources, and then their willingness to kind of work with our hot team. If there's hot teams nationally, I'm assuming there's a national hot team training registry or whatever, but just make sure that they all have resources. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, but I do want to make sure that it's something that has accurate results. So great idea. High five, number 1. Number 2, low barrier shelter beds. I understand the need for those, and I think starting with 5 is a great idea. That would be a cost of $96,725 per year. Like you said, it's not something that happens immediately. I was on a ride along with my fire department and my sheriff's department since our last meeting here, and every call, with the exception of 1, had to do with homeless individuals in our city here. And it is a draw on our law enforcement personnel, and we really need to figure out a way to do it. With that said, the whole purpose of this, in my opinion, is being able to restore people's dignity, desire, and will. It's not just giving them a bed, and I understand they need low barrier shelters to kind of get out of that. However, I agree with the mayor. I do not want any temporary shelters in our community at this point in time. I don't agree to putting them in our C2 or C3 areas. I don't want them in my community. I am, however, in favor of renting beds, and also I would be in favor, and I think perhaps my council might be, if this is an option, of maybe subsidizing the build on an existing shelter to add some beds that maybe we could use exclusively. So if Catholic Charities has a footprint where we could add 10 beds or 20 beds that, hey, this is the Vista wing, great. I'd be willing to do that. Same thing in the other area. And knowing that our social workers have a flex fund and that it's not going to be an issue for them getting these people who want the help to the shelters is awesome. So provide low barriers, yes. Build shelter, no. Hot team, yes. I have a lot of things written down here, but none of it has anything to do with answering those 2 questions. Hopefully you have the direction you need from me. Thank you.
Councilmember Rigby.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you again for being here tonight and going through this with us. I also want to say thank you to our speakers tonight. I appreciate hearing from you, and I was disappointed a little bit to hear that you hadn't been in touch with the services that you needed for your domestic violence issues. You have been? Good. Well, I was going to say that I was crisis intervention counselor for a long time for domestic abuse victims. So that distresses me when I hear that that doesn't work. But
Okay, we can't have a
so
conversation going on like that
I just did want to say I appreciate the comments that you made, and I did want to talk. I appreciated what Paul Webster had to say, but I think in the comment, if I understood it correctly, saying use the existing programs that we have in Vista, don't reinvent the wheel through the city. As good as that sounds, as utopian as that sounds, all of the programs collectively that we have in this city are not really making much of a dent. Might not be the right verbiage, in the issue that we have, in as much as our homeless population is increasing every year. Almost every day every week we see new homeless on the street that I haven't seen before. So I appreciate the thought, but it's not realistic at this point in time because the programs that we have are not fixing the problem, not alleviating the needs for 100% of the people that we have in this situation. So I did hear you. I just don't know that we can make that work out. But I do have a couple of questions for you. First off, I do agree with the outreach team, and I actually have visited the Oceanside outreach team and talked with them, and I would be happy to do it again. I'd like to have a much more in-depth conversation with them than I had when I was there previously. So I'm in favor of that. And as much as we have the budget for 2, I agree with my colleagues that starting with 1 social worker to see how that works. And if we need to immediately jump into a second one, I'm okay with that. But let's start with 1 first. But I have a question on that because you said that the social worker would be contracted to the city. Contracted through an outside agency or a personal contract? How is that going to work?
Well, I don't know if you want to.
It would most likely be through an agency. We would issue a request for proposals or ask for interest from firms. It could be an individual, but it would more likely be through an agency.
So through an agency, would it be 1 individual permanently assigned to Vista, or would
That's
they
what we
be
would request.
rotating
No.
through?
Our scope of services would request the 1 individual to maintain continuity and to establish rapport. And
so then my question is, why do we not bring on board city staff a social worker instead of contracting through an agency?
The social worker actually comes with pre-existing services. So they come with the backbone of, they're an agency that works in this every day. City of Vista, we're not our own health and human services department, so we don't have as many connections and services as others. And that's also, all the hot teams we've looked at, they have reached out and gone with contracted workers as well, and they have stated that that seems to work best for those connections.
Is it contracted through Health and Human Services?
It could be. Not in this instances that we've talked to, it hasn't been Health and Human Services. It's been other agencies.
And you said we're going to go to an RFP for that anyway?
some type of request for bids.
Okay. And then the program that we're looking at for the outreach team and the social worker, you said we would be using SB2 funding for that. Is that the same funding that we need to put aside, something for the van that we talked about at the last session?
No. So SB2 funding, SB2 passed last year and established an ongoing funding source based on per capita and point in time demographics. So that money is expected to be a state-issued grant ongoing in perpetuity. The specific, and that's $350,000. The specific funding that has a one-year time frame was the funding that was inserted into the budget bill for 1920 for $250,000 for prevention services.
Okay.
But let me just ask, I thought the same thing you thought, so maybe I'm wrong also, but I think the van that we talked about last time would come out of either the SB2 funding or the affordable housing funding. So there is a pool of about $550,000, $600,000, of which 100 could be your social worker and another about 90 could be your van. I'm not saying it will be, but there is sufficient funding. So I think it's the same fund.
I'm looking at the pot of money. I'm one of those people that I want to see everything that we're asking for I want to see everything that we're asking for, and I want to see how much money we have and the sources before I say yes to any one thing. So I just wanted to make sure I understood the various sources.
The van would be coming out of either affordable housing or SB $2, and so would the social worker.
Okay.
And we'll be bringing back, the detailed budget of what you guys asked us to bring forward, and also the funding sources as well.
Okay, excellent. And when we talk about renting, and I'm in favor of renting, I agree with the mayor. I'm having been through that before. I don't want to go into building another shelter right away. That's not something I want to take a first step on at this point in time. But if we're renting 5 beds, that does not restrict any availability in other sources for any other clients. So we have these 5 beds, but we have 73 other clients out on the street. We're not restricted to being able to use any available resources. Am I correct? For the other 73?
I'm not sure if I don't quite understand the question.
So we have 5 beds, but if we have more people that we need to help besides the 5, renting those beds from those programs doesn't restrict any availability that still might be there for other clients.
Yes.
It does not restrict.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Any other sources you might have, for instance, you might have people in the day van, if you were to adopt that also, who would go to the day center.
Okay.
And those kinds of things. What it might mean is you might not have other available beds because we will have absorbed any excess these shelters might have by renting them. But again, it wouldn't restrict any other services, or if they were to go directly to a mental health facility that had space, or an addiction facility.
Okay. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, the social worker would be able to connect the whole network, and if there was a bed in San Diego, National City, Chula Vista, and they wanted to go there, they would take them there. They could take them to whatever available bed there is.
Okay, excellent. So I think you answered all of my questions, but in concert with my colleagues, I'm not in favor of building a shelter at this point, and I absolutely want to see everything laid out as far as income, expense, source, etc. So thank you. Very detailed. I appreciate it very, very much. Thank you.
I agree with you. And I just had one other question. So if we didn't fill the beds, if we had rented 5 beds and so we didn't fill them for the Vista, would they fill them with other people then? And then what if the Vista we had somebody that come there and they went, oh, I'm sorry, we filled your beds?
Right. Those are all excellent questions, and there is work to be done. And I also want to say 5 beds is a good outcome. As you saw in those numbers, we would have to work at what that actual number would be and whether they would reserve it if by a certain time of day we hadn't filled that bed. And I think all of those details would have to be worked out contractually.
Right. In order to have a bed available, though, to get, if there's a problem in the evening or at night or whatever with the sheriff, then we'd have to have an available bed, in order to take care of that problem. So
you may have a decision. You may say, well, up till 6 p.m., and then I would like a credit if they use the bed against the costs that you're absorbing. Or you may say, I want that bed held open because someone could come in at 2 in the morning from Vista. I mean, those decisions will come back to you.
okay, and I agree with Councilmember Green that if we pay to expand the beds, if anybody has a larger footprint, they could do that. Maybe we could help in that area also. And then one other question is, so who would drive the van? Would the social worker drive the?
No, we're talking about 2 different programs.
As another employee?
We're actually talking about 2 different programs. The van that was discussed a few meetings ago is a day outreach program where the city would either rent or lease a van and contract with an agency to get people to a housing navigation and social service center during the day. Connecting persons experiencing homelessness with a shelter bed and how they get transported there would be a completely different transportation system. If it is a van, it's a separate van that's worked out through the social worker or the supportive, maybe the shelter has a van, we don't know. So 2 different vans.
Okay, and that might be an issue because, like with the van, but I can't see the Uber wanting to pick up a homeless person and take him somewhere, or even a taxi if they, we said, oh, we want you to take them over here to Carlsbad, this homeless person. I'm not sure if they're going to load all their stuff in the car, in the van or the taxi. They all have stuff, and so they load it in and take it with them, or what? That would be something that need to be worked out too.
Right, and this is an issue that these folks have dealt with, and it would be a good, discussion for the Oceanside folks that are already doing this. They have found ways to do this. They have, some of these larger agencies have a van. If they're going to a particular agency, they may have a driver in a van that might be able to pick people up. There are a lot of different ways in which people finagle this, and that's why those flex funds are important, and that's why those agency connections, having social workers connected to large social service agencies, provide those sorts of resources as well.
Okay. That's it. Then that's the last of my questions. Deputy Mayor.
Well, as relates to the van, I would not want to purchase a van until we'd had the social worker on staff for at least 6 months, and that social worker could come back and have a conversation with the council and say, yeah, I've been, down to Vista Village. I've been downtown. I can tell you here the 5 or 6 individuals, not by name, but I can tell you here, I know the people who I've asked them if this was available, would you avail yourself of it? And they said they would love it. And so, until we have until we physically go speak to the people who are the potential customers for the van, I wouldn't be for the van.
And just for clarification, the van would be on the prevention side, not for necessarily the transport to the beds that we possibly could rent in another city. But we'll detail all that out in the draft plan.
But my thought is that the social worker is going to give us, I would like to see the social worker, we support Operation Hope, Solutions for Change, a lot of good organizations that are focused on family homelessness. I would like the social worker to focus on the unsheltered population.
Yeah.
Exclusively. Because I want them to be able to answer questions like this one about the day van. And I had to point out the day van went from 70 to 90,000, and it's only 10,000 less than a PhD social worker. So anyway, no need to comment on that. Just saying we got to get our ducks in a row there. Who's on the hot team? Is that sheriff's deputies that are members of the hot team? But it's not the cops team. So
it is members of the cops team.
When I'm drawing my Venn diagram, I've got cops deputies and hot team, and there's some overlap. Right. So some people are both cops team deputies and hot team members. But then I've got my social worker as part of the hot team. Is this just a different way of organizing people, or are we hiring more sheriff's deputies?
So I'll take that one. So we have the cops team, which does a number of things throughout the community, but we also have individuals that specialize with the homeless population, as you're aware. So those same individual or individuals would be part of the hot team with the social worker.
Mm-hmm. So the social worker would be the addition.
Correct.
But the hot team is really just a new name, new mission for existing personnel.
Correct, from the sheriff's law enforcement side.
And would we be dedicating more of our, what are we at, 89 now, deputies?
87 or 88, but yeah.
Let's go with 88.
Let's go with 89.
I like 89 better too. Are we reallocating? Because what do we have, 1 or 2 deputies right now that's focused on homeless?
Yeah, and it could be a number of people in the HOTS team, but there is 1 or 2 that are primarily assigned to the homeless. But as you know,
right now we just have 1 deputy.
When they go out with multiple deputies, including the sergeant. So it's not just one member that works with the homeless.
But do we have 1 deputy today who's the
that we would assign to homelessness and make as
I mean
create
today
the lead.
Under existing policy, do we not have? Do we have 1 person? Who's,
we have a cops deputy that's assigned to homeless. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's what
correct.
I thought. Yeah. Okay, so we would be adding a 2nd deputy that's assigned to work on that issue, and then the 2 of them together would be the hot team.
And if it's a second deputy or a third deputy or whatever it is, they're a member of the current cops team right now.
Right. All right. I'm still a little fuzzy on that. But
Along with a paramedic. Isn't there a paramedic that goes out with them now still?
That's another program that
sometimes.
can go out with them, but they don't go out with the cops deputies right now on a regular basis. But we're looking at getting that going on a more frequent basis.
Okay.
I'll let Councilman Green give that piece of information. Okay, look, as relates to the shelter, right now we're being told under Boise, the Boise case, that we cannot enforce our camping laws, and therefore the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has given us the following two choices, and there doesn't appear, if there's a third, please somebody correct me, but it appears to be that we have the following two choices, and if there's a third and somebody doesn't tell me about it, I'm going to be very angry later. I'm dead serious about that. I mean, we need to do our research and know that we've got the options lined out, but option A, allow 125 people to live on our streets. We know where many of them live. Many of them are living in the land behind Costco. It's not a safe environment. There are others that are over there, close by off Hacienda, on Caltrans property, on city property, and they're spread throughout the community. But there are some centers, and we have a moral question that is very weighty that we have to deal with, which is that a righteous thing that we have so many people who are living unsheltered, outdoors? Some of them have better circumstances than others, frankly, because some of us, including me, have been down there. Some of them are working, have multiple tents and are living a pretty clean existence down there. And others are in just the most horrid conditions that would terrify you. This issue of, one of the things that I wrote down before, we talked about opposing building new shelter facilities, is the idea, no city wants to be the first. No city wants to be the only one. So what can we do we keep talking about reaching out to our other cities, but, did we get an answer to how many shelter beds for men does Oceanside have, does Carlsbad have? You told us about how many are located within those cities, but have any of those cities gone down this path to acquire, a license to X number of beds? Do we know the answer to that? What I would like to say is, because we know folks are going to move from San Marcos to Vista and from Escondido to Oceanside, whatever it is, we really should have a regional approach to this. And we really should fund some of these programs regionally. And, if San Marcos really only has 46, maybe it doesn't make sense for them to build a facility, but maybe it makes sense for them to help fund ours. My guess is that if somebody's standing in front of you and you're the shelter operator and you have a heart, which I hope that they will, you're going to say, well, I've got a bed, and you're going to think, well, have you been to Vista recently? I don't know what the barrier is for the use. I would certainly say if by 6 p.m. nobody's in it, we wouldn't want to hold a bed, open all night long while somebody's wishing that they could be laying their head in it. But at some point, and even if it wasn't for the Boise case, if you've got somebody that has no place to live and they want to go somewhere and they say, today's the day I decided I want to start my life over again, and I want to fix what's wrong, but I need some place to go. I know that we would all want that person to have a place to go. And what we're saying right now is there's no place for them to go. Now, where to put it, I'm sure the whole community will fill up the chambers if we start talking about where to put it. That's a big problem. But I can't wrap my mind around if there's not space and we've got people living on the street, and if part of the solution is obviously to provide an opportunity for somebody to get off the street. I mean, it's all about where we do it and how we do it, right? But I don't know that I can see my way clear to say that there shouldn't be a bed available or made available so that an individual would have the opportunity. Now, if all we're doing is creating more opportunity for prolongment and enablement, because low barrier means, and by the way, you gave us these numbers, the average tenure, the average dwell time in the shelter was about 7.5 days. Did you do that math? I did the division. I wasn't very good at math, but I got, based on the number of shelter beds available and that were filled and the number that you said occupied them, it was an average stay of, I think, about 7 days.
Right, yeah, and there's a huge range.
It's not
of
an
actual
exact
stays,
right. It's
but
not an
yeah,
exact
huge
science.
range. Some people are there months, but
well, some are there for one night and some are there for 3 months, right? I mean,
absolutely.
I'm talking about the mathematical mean.
Yeah. I think Julie's just saying, I mean, in that time, it's not just a bed, and I also want to continue to stress that in all of the places, and in these low barrier shelters, there's extensive services available. They work very hard to get them into contractual relationship. They sign a sort of contract about what they want to achieve, again, with this trauma-informed care model. So, we've been talking about it as a bed, but it really is much more than that in all of these.
But I'd like to hear more about that, and and what different models employed have varying rates of success. I mean, if we're providing a place of rest to come and have a shower and a meal, and then I'm going to go back to the streets, and I got my kind of vacation from the street, that's probably not what we want to do. But if we're providing an opportunity for people to make the decision to change their lives and to make a transformative change, that's the kind of thing I couldn't see my way clear to not saying that, at least as a private citizen, I have a duty to fund. I don't, the whole issue of the government funding it is another thing. But if not us, if not the government, then who on this? Because. So I don't know, guys. We're driving past this problem every day. We're seeing people. We've got. I don't think we should do all these things at once. I think that's a huge mistake. I think maybe getting the social worker in place first, somebody who could begin to understand on a granular level, person by person, individual level, who the people are who are in this 125. I'm sure there's 75 of them who have been here for longer than a year, and we could at least understand by name who these folks are. That individual, that social worker, to be able to come back to us and stand in front of the council and say, here's what I've learned, here's what I think could solve the problem for, let me tell you, I've got these 5 individuals who are all suffering similar problems, and here's what I think they need. Because I'm not hearing anybody who's on a first-name basis with these folks. I know some of our cops deputies are on a first-name basis with a lot of these folks, but I don't know if they're the right folks, equipped and expert to come back and give us this information. But and when we talk about data, I also made a note that I wanted to say. We spent almost $400,000 planning was supposed to be $1 million park, then it became a $3.5 million park. But I mean, man, can we spend money in a hurry with consultants and planning things? I mean, I got in the wrong business, big time. I don't want to spend way too much money hiring people to do fancy pie charts and stuff. If we get I would be happy to start with hearing from somebody who has firsthand relationships with the individuals in our community who need help. And then I would like to see what a reasonably educated and intelligent person could put together in the way of statistics and information on a computer, and this contractor, are they going to work at City Hall, or are they going to have an office somewhere else? They're going to be a contractor, but
They
are
likely would not work at City Hall.
They would not work at City Hall. Okay. So I guess that begs the question too of who is their supervisor going to be? Are they going to report?
All of that would be spelled out in the contractual agreement. It would likely be through the city manager's office and the housing division. As you know, we've established an internal homeless task force, so they would participate in that as well. And then again, the data that they'd be collecting, they'd be inputting for Vista residents who are experiencing homelessness in the county's data homeless management information system, so that if that person ended up in another community, we could hopefully track their service and their outreach all over the place. But we'd have a better sense if we have somebody who's specifically entering data for Vista into the system that exists.
Mm-hmm.
We're not talking about having to bring on another consultant to do that type of thing. We just need to take advantage of the services that are available.
One of the things I wanted you to help me understand, maybe you aren't prepared to do it right now, but what are the staffing requirements for a shelter that would meet the legal requirements for us to enforce our laws? Because if you're only there for one night, how much opportunity do you really have to make? You probably have to spend a couple of days getting to know somebody to really begin to start, building that. And then we've got the social worker whose job is to build a rapport and relationship over time, whether these folks are at the shelter or whether they're still on the street. So is it duplicative? Can that person spend some of their time at the shelter if we only have 5 beds? I get we're buying a piece of personnel already in place, and that's part of the cost. But, as we think about going forward, these are ideas I want to understand better so that, we have the information. I guess that's all I've got to say right now. But, as we leave here tonight and we think about all these people living on our streets, and the last thing I want to do is put 125 people in shelters only to have 125 more fill their place. It cannot be that cannot be the solution that we implement. The solution has to say there's a problem in this country and in this state and in this county, and we have our share of it in the city, and we're going to do our fair share to solve the problem. But then after we've done our fair share, our citizens are going to look at us and say, do no more, because all of our neighbors should be doing their share as well. And, the last thing we want is to become a Santa Monica or a San Francisco who, by providing excessive services and an attitude of acceptance, have created an absolute magnet and have devastated the well-being of their communities. And when we talked tonight and in our council goals about quality of life, we're not just talking about improving quality of life for those living on the street. We're also talking about improving the quality of life for the people that live in our community, so that they can have the ability to go shopping downtown in a clean environment, so that our businesses can thrive, so we don't have people shooting heroin behind, what was our good friend who owned the brewery, who constantly called us about the people doing heroin or selling heroin behind his business, so that all of our parks are safe and our streets are safe and kids can play. That is our biggest charge up here, is a clean community and a safe community. And I can't tell the people I represent that we've done all we can to make a clean and a safe community until we stop walking past people living in these gullies and ravines and begin to figure out, and I don't have any, delusion that we're going to solve a problem that's vexed the entire country. But I can tell you that I appreciate the fact that we're taking first steps and that we're doing it methodically, because certainly taking no action is not the righteous thing to do. So I appreciate that we are proceeding. We don't need to do it all at once. Doing something is better than doing nothing, and doing it slowly so that you measure twice and cut once should be the order of the day here. And I think we start with the social worker. I would be happy to start with the social worker and put everything else we've discussed on pause for at least 4 months, 6 months, and then I want that person in front of the council to talk with us about what they've learned. That's my thought. I'm not personally I've been on the council for 5 years. I've been talking about this issue for 5 years. It's taken 5 years to get to this point, and now all of a sudden, because in front of us, we have to do everything in 30 days or something, or by January. I mean, we weren't in a rush for 5 years. I'm so glad that we're here. I've been personally calling for this issue to come to the forefront. I was personally involved in elevating it to one of our top goals. I'm going to take a little bit of credit for all of my colleagues. My point is, I'm not trying to say I'm the reason we're doing this. What I am trying to say is, I believe in it, but we don't have to do it all at once. We should do it carefully. We should take our time. Thank you.
I would just want to say one thing. The 125 people, a lot of them live in the creek area behind Costco in that area. A lot of them are on drugs. There's a lot of drug going on. There are people maybe that some of them don't want to, but to go back to the Boise case, and if we don't have beds to offer, we can't move them. And a lot of them, when we clean them out of the creek, they're ending up downtown. And so in order to get them off our public area, we have to have the extra beds to put them to. So if we fill them up, and then we get a call and we don't have a bed, then you can't do anything about them. Then that's where they are. So that's why I said we need to have some beds. We need to leave them open for Vista beds, so that when a sheriff comes across an issue, and like you say, and I don't think 25 people are going to come one night and all want to change their mind. It's going to be 1 or 2. But I think you still need to leave a couple beds open, so that if there's an issue going on downtown somewhere, that they can put this person in, there's a bed, and they can move them off because they're urinating behind the buildings downtown. There's the problem downtown. So I want to protect the businesses downtown, so that and the parks too. They do drugs in the park sometimes. There's got to be answers to this, so that it's free for normal people to go there, and it isn't taken over by homeless. And so that's my concern. So I just want to bring that to remember the Boise case, that we have to have beds open in order to get people, in order to move an incident from somewhere else. So that's my thing. So onward to Councilmember Contreras.
Yeah, and I think just to reiterate, there's an obvious mismatch, right, between our goal and the reality that we don't have beds available, and what that means that we can't do. I don't know if there's a majority that would entertain taking a look at partnerships in the future. Not something that we're, maybe don't look at right now, but partnerships in the future for either a temporary shelter or permanent, where we wouldn't be on the hook for, funding all of this, but we could have several partners that come together to bring this to fruition. And I think at the end of the day, if someone wants to come and build a shelter in C2 or C3, they are able to do that. Is that correct? Or do we need to have a special use permit?
In the C2 zone, they are permitted by right. So if an individual private developer wanted to construct a shelter within the zoning codes and parameters of the planning department, yes, that could be done. And then in the C3 zone, they are permitted with a special use permit.
Okay. So I guess if there's anyone out there that wants to, bring this to the table and talk about, we want to build a shelter in this specific area, it's a C2, and then, maybe that's something that in the future, the council, there would be a majority that would say, hey, let's take a look at how we could, because that's essentially what we're saying before, when we're saying that we would like to rent beds, or we would be okay with helping to fund additional beds at an existing shelter. It just seems like the hesitation is for the city itself to build something. So I don't see how we could pursue wanting to add beds at a facility or rent beds at another facility and say 100% no, that we wouldn't help to put money towards building a temporary shelter or a permanent shelter. So I don't see how that logically would work, because it seems like if we're okay with adding beds to an existing shelter, then it would be a very similar type of thing if someone else wanted to come to the city, a nonprofit or whatever the case might be, to build a small shelter of, I don't know, 25 to 50 beds, or I'm not sure. I'm just throwing some numbers out there. And then the city would then say, okay, well, maybe we can do some cost sharing here. So I just want to leave that open. I don't know if in the future that's something that there would be a majority, but it seems like maybe there might be a majority that springs up that wants to look at that. So hopefully there's someone out there listening that, just wants to come to Vista and build something. And when we're talking about temporary shelter, what is the definition of that? What is the actual duration? Are we talking about 364 days? Are we talking about 90 days?
I mean, how long the shelter would be up?
Permissible, correct. If it's a temporary shelter, what's the permissible duration?
So Alpha's been there for a long time.
So I believe a temporary shelter is when you say temporary shelter, you're talking about the physical shelter itself being temporary, not the stay in it being temporary. So the city council, when Operation Hope used to be a winter shelter, we would have to make a declaration each year to allow for that temporary use. That would be at the discretion of the city council if it was going to be a temporary shelter, meaning seasonal or something of that nature. Are you asking about that, or about a person who is in the shelter being, how long is a temporary stay?
I guess that too.
Well, the most experienced entity in this area is the city of San Diego, and they originally were hoping to move people out within 120 days. They were stymied in that effort because they couldn't find housing to move housing-ready homeless into another place so they could turn that over. What they ended up doing is hiring twice the number of housing finders, and they're beginning to move people out after about 120 days, but they're still having that issue. So I don't know that there's a national definition, but temporary usually talks about
the structure
itself. And then the hope is to turn over its inhabitants as quickly as possible, and that's the housing issue.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Green.
I'll try to be as quick as possible. I'm the last name on the board over here. So one thing that I had a question on, and I understand Deputy Mayor Franklin's ability and need, responsibility per se to be fiscally responsible with not wanting to throw a ton of money at this all at once. But it's my understanding the reason why we're doing this whole plan to address homelessness is that we actually have money coming from the state, not from the general fund, that's going to be recurring money that we have to spend. So they don't let us just save this money up. If they that's a question. If they send me $600,000, can I just spend $100,000 and then save $500 for next year when they give me $600 more grand? Or is this money that they give me that I need to spend to address this problem right now? Because that was my understanding, and that's why we want to do it as one big plan, right? Go ahead.
Well, there's a couple of different. So prevention money, the $250, that one is state allocated budget.
Okay.
It's a one-time use.
That's got that.
We have to do that.
Love it.
The affordable housing dollars is money we have for affordable housing. We have the ability to allocate up to $250,000 for homelessness. If we don't, then that just goes towards housing. So it stays in that same fund. SB2 money is new money where we have to allocate. That can go for a whole myriad of different purposes, including...
That's money we have to spend annually?
Yeah, that's money we receive annually, and we have to just kind of put a budget of what we plan to spend it on. We can build affordable housing or other types of housing, or we can put it towards homelessness. And since this was a strategic goal, we wanted to put it towards homelessness to see where we can go
I think
ahead
as a council, we decided we wanted to spend that $250,000 $50 grand to address homelessness as opposed to just let it sitting in there. So I'm good with all of the aspects. I understand this is one aspect of it. I prevent homelessness, improve quality of life, enhance community. I understand all of these, and I'm good with enacting them as we can, obviously giving us the appropriate information when they come back with the report. But I think we've camped out on all of these strategies a whole lot. We've defined the ones that we like, the ones that we don't like, and if the money's coming in from the state for us to use, and it's not going to be a financial burden on our annual operating budget, I want to spend the money the state's giving us to combat this problem, and I'm sure Deputy Mayor Franklin does as well. So that's number one. The other thing I wanted to address is just logically, I want to throw this out to the community. The question was asked logically, why would you not want to build a shelter here, and why would you want to spend money on other beds or building a shelter in other cities? My logical response to that is that if I build a temporary shelter here or a temporary parking lot where people can come and sleep overnight and shower and have free food and free beds, they're going to come here, and that's going to welcome additional homeless people into my community. So since I'm trying to cut that down, my logical response is for that shelter to be outside the community at this point in time, and I continue to believe that that's the best way. I don't think having a parking lot where people can sleep 24 hours or come and shower or be fed or exchange needles or a safe spot to do drugs is anything that I want within the city limits of Vista. And the fact that other people are doing it in their cities, I think that's fantastic that they're doing it. It's working for them. I will encourage it, and I will bring people who need help to those locations as opposed to putting it in the heart of my town. I don't have any spot for it in District 2 per se, and I haven't necessarily had any of my council members come forward saying that their community was really hoping to have a temporary shelter built in their neck of the woods. So the logical aspect of it, in my opinion, is that if you build it, they will come, and I'm trying to avoid that. So
I agree with that. I would also say to you that Operation Hope was a temporary shelter that became a permanent shelter. Solutions for Change was our original years ago. We've gone through years of this. So they were a temporary shelter, and then they were a temporary winter shelter, emergency winter shelter, which became into a permanent shelter. We have more social services than any other city, which is why we have more homeless here than some of the other cities, is because we have all the social services here. So I would agree with you if you.
I just wanted to add on, too, that these are low barrier shelters we're talking about. So we're saying, hey, we want the active drug user. We want the active people having huge problems. It's not the homeless people who are struggling on the side of the road, the families who are trying to help the teens, the foster kids. We have programs for that. These are low barrier. You'd be either addicted to drugs, mentally unstable. I mean, that's what we're trying to find is the solutions we have in our area don't serve the low barrier. And I frankly don't want a low barrier shelter in my neck of the woods.
I agree with you. So, Deputy Mayor Franklin, you're up again.
Well, Councilman Green, I agree with everything that you said. I don't want a needle exchange, and I like I said, I do not want the kinds of facilities and program providers who are going to simply prolong people's homelessness or facilitate it or enable it. I'm a tough love guy all the way, and I believe that fixing things is hard, and treating the symptoms is easy, but treating the disease is always the difficult part. I am more than happy to take advantage of state dollars that we would otherwise lose. I would say, and I'm not as concerned about, I always want to be fiscally conservative, you know that. But this is not an issue of money. This is an issue of getting the policies right. And I just want to make sure we get the policies right, because we're going to have a lot to account for and answer for if we get it wrong. So that's why I'm not in a rush to go too far too quickly. We have the ability on some of these monies. I understand, and we could just choose to write a check to some of our existing charities, which I wouldn't be totally opposed, instead of some of the things that have been brought to us as possible items. So in terms of that money can find a worthy use and a worthy home with some of the good organizations that are already in our community. And that might be something we want to look at before we go creating programs at the city that we're piloting. We aren't the only city in the state and country. I think we ought to first be implementing programs that have been piloted elsewhere. I don't know that we need to necessarily be a laboratory, or, as we're all fond of saying, reinventing the wheel is something we don't want to be a part of here in Vista. We want to look for solutions that have succeeded elsewhere. And I can't reiterate enough that becoming a San Francisco or a Santa Monica is not what I'm after. And I don't want anything that's going to bring more of the problem into our community either. So I want to make that very clear, but I also don't want to shirk the responsibility of saying, what are the services that are needed that will change people's lives if they're ready to change them. And for the people who are ready to change their life, those are the people I want to make sure that we have. If somebody says, hey, today's the day I want to stop using methamphetamine and I want to pick myself up, I want to reestablish my relationship with my family, man, I want to make sure we're able to help that person because, and I also want to make sure that we have, what we legally need so that we can start cleaning up our community. I mean, it's not just in District 1, 2, or 3. I've got it, this problem in District 4 at Stater Brothers. The people I represent can't go shopping at the grocery store without being accosted by people in the parking lot. There is a constant presence of panhandlers at the off-ramp on Sycamore. I've called the sheriff's dispatch so many times to report it, and reported it to our city manager so many times. They're tired of hearing from me about it. But those are the kind of quality of life issues that when I went door to door and talked to families I represent, they don't think we're doing anything about it. And I don't have all the answers, but we've got to begin to take some concrete steps to do something about it to improve quality of life, and for people who are in our community, and to address our moral responsibility to people who need our help and who are willing to take it, and that's a big issue, and that's why I'm so interested in the legislative advocacy portion of this. Is because I don't think that it should be our civil right to take up residence in a public park or an environmental wilderness preserve. I don't much like the fact that I have to work every day of my life. I've accepted it as reality, and the rest of us have to too. I mean, I don't like it either. But, just to say I don't want to work anymore. And now, if you can't work because you're mentally ill or physically disabled, what do we have to do to help that person? We all want to help that person. Sometimes people want to paint fiscal conservatives as, oh, you don't want to help that person. We all want to help that person. Let's figure out how to help them. But then let's find out how to motivate the people who can work, who want to be rehabilitated and productive, and who want their sense of self-worth restored. Let's figure out how to do that.
Councilmember Contreras, and then maybe we can move on. Huh?
Yeah, sure. This is a point of clarification. There is a big difference between logic and reasoning. And what I've heard is reasoning and not necessarily logic. At the end of the day, I 100% agree with Deputy Mayor Franklin saying that we hear it over and over and over again from the people of Vista that we aren't doing enough. And the reality is that we're not. And we're going to continue to be painted as not doing enough when everybody, and this is how we got to this point, when every single entity says, not in my backyard, that's exactly how we got to this point. Okay? It's a lot of logic in that one. So, if we actually want to have action where we're reducing homelessness, I 100% understand. Maybe not everybody, and I've seen it, when I went down with the cops team, or, in other instances, on the first try, maybe the 10th touch, maybe there's still no acceptance of what the issue is for that individual, or acceptance of the fact that there's other programs out there that they could be a part of and potentially change their lives around, right? So we understand that that's out there. It's a certain percentage of the population that we're discussing today. However, I do feel like we have a moral obligation to make sure that we're taking concrete steps with this money that we may not see again, to actually do something about the problem. So, and the problem is that we don't have enough places to put people. That's the underlying problem. It is the fundamental problem. And so to dance around it and continue to say, not in my community, these people, if they want services, they can get them, great, but we're going to not do X, Y, and Z because if you build it, they will come. That's it's very anecdotal. But at the end of the day, we do have to look at this as a regional issue, right? And so that's why I recommended an ad hoc committee where maybe some of us can work together in a bipartisan way and look at what long-term solutions are for this region, specifically North County, because I know Councilmember Rigby has been a part of the regional task force, and there's a lot of criticisms in that North County doesn't have the seat at the table like they should. So I think 100% we have to focus at a regional level, but we also have to understand how we got here. And there's a lot of different reasons, different policies that, perhaps didn't work out. And the unintended consequences are that people are living in squalor. However, if we continue to say, we really care about this, we're going to continue to pay a consultant to put all these proposals together, and then we actually don't do what we need to do to start making a dent in the population that is chronically homeless, then I think we're wasting our money. That's my personal opinion. But at the end of the day, the main issue is that these individuals do not have a place to go. So the solution needs to take into account that we need to have a place for these individuals to go. We could have 6,000 vans going around, and it will not get to the heart of this problem. So that's pretty much all I have to say. I think we've had a really good discussion today, and I really appreciate everybody's comments. And let's just make sure, we're actually getting to the root of what the problem is.
Okay, with that, we're going to move on to our next. No, we're not.
I just want to thank the City Council for a really nice discussion tonight. Thank our consultants, Ms. Dubig, Ms. Gantwork, and Ms. Lee here on staff with me. We will be back before you in January with the draft plan with all of the implementation items outlined, and we can discuss it further at that time if we want to move forward or take a pause.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience with us. Okay, with that, we're going to move on. So next we have our second discussion item, D2, Proposed General Plan Amendment of Zone Change at 1050 to 1062 Taylor Street. And Community Development Engineering Director John Conley is going to provide the staff report.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is a preliminary review of a proposal on Taylor Street, as the Mayor indicated, 1050 to 1062. The location of this property is on the north side of Old Taylor Street. It's one parcel that totals about 0.87 acres. The address is 1050 to 1062. It includes several structures. The general plan designation is commercial general, and the zoning is C1, which is a retail zone. The site's currently developed with an office building, a legal non-conforming single-family residence, and a small commercial yard. This is a bird's eye view of the property, again on the north side of Old Taylor, just to the west of Fire Station number 3. To the west of the property is a site that was reviewed by the council earlier this year for a proposed general plan amendment. And to the south is an undeveloped property that's also zoned for multifamily development, and an application has been submitted for an apartment development on that property. Preliminary proposals to change the general plan or zoning always come to the council for discussion. One was submitted in September of this year to develop the property with 6 duplex units for a total of 12 multifamily units on the property. That would require a general plan amendment from commercial general to medium high density residential, which is a 15 unit per acre density in the general plan. And it would require a zone change from C1 to RM15, which is the corresponding zone that would allow it to 15 units per acre. So on the 0.87 acre site, it would allow up to 12 units. The general plan designation is shown on the left here. The proposed general plan is on the top. It's general commercial, and what's proposed by the applicant, is on the bottom. That's medium high density residential. On the right is the zoning. The existing zoning is commercial C1 at the top, and what's proposed is multifamily RM15 on the bottom right slide, which would be consistent with the zoning to the north and south of the site. The applicant submitted a preliminary proposal, which is provided here. It shows the 6 duplex units and a small open space area, a central parking access driveway, and access to the 2-car garages that would be under each of the 12 units. This is a bird's eye view of the proposal showing the motor court and an artist rendering, all of which were included in your packet. So as I mentioned, these types of applications are always brought to the council for discussion. We typically provide comments to the prospective applicant before they file a formal application so that they have some insight into how the council views their proposed application. If they do choose to submit a formal application, it would have to go through public hearings at the Planning Commission. It would have come back to the council for an ultimate decision. And that completes my staff presentation. I'm available for any questions.
I have 3 speakers. You want to hear speakers first?
Sure.
Okay, we'll start with Dan Niebum. He's the applicant's representative.
Thank you, Mayor Ritter, members of the council. Dan Niebum, the Lightfoot Planning Group, offices in Carlsbad. Yes, representing the property owner. Appreciate the very thorough presentation John just gave. And I don't have a very formal presentation tonight, but essentially, we're asking for this change because when you look at the land use pattern and the viability of this property in the future, we think it's better positioned as multifamily residential. This is the only commercial property that's zoned and planned for commercial that doesn't front on East Vista Way in that East Vista Way corridor. This fronts on Old Taylor, which is a residential street. And when you look at what's being proposed and the development pattern around there, we're looking at the viability of this piece in the future, and it really loses its, its commercial appeal as it moves forward. We're looking at doing a, quality multifamily project on this property, replacing some very dated, commercial buildings on the property. So I think it makes sense. It provides another housing option going forward in the future, and I think it fits in with the corridor over there. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, no questions right now, and then if you
okay, thank you.
Hang in there when we get back to it. Mary Gilman.
Hi, good evening. I'm Mary Gilman. I live just north of this property off Barsby in the E1 area there. So I understand that this, would probably be a good fit for the other development going on in that area and the limited commercial in the area. My concern is that there be sufficient parking for both the residents and the guests such that there's not any overflow. Since this Old Taylor Road is 2 lanes, one in each direction, there's no way that anyone can or should be trying to park out there. And I say that because in light of the fact that the development right opposite that, the fire station basically, that Taylor Vista Apartments, 50 apartments on that corner, it's just an opportunity for a lot of congestion, a lot of traffic, in addition to the fact that bottleneck at Old Taylor, where the East Vista Way becomes 1 lane in each direction, that a lot of traffic They get frustrated right at that corner, and then they cut down Old Taylor or East Taylor just to try to avoid that bottleneck. So it's another opportunity for traffic problems and traffic congestion. So in light of this development plan and the proposed one, again, on the corner of East Vista Way and Old Taylor, just that, it's just going to make traffic worse. So, and also I represent myself, again, being a neighbor of the area, but also GARD, Guahomie Alliance for Responsible Development, and, we're just concerned about all the issues related to the traffic flow and again, the parking in that area. The parking for the Nassar Homes, which is right up the street across from the Shea Homes, the apartments there are always parking in their lot, and, again, it's just kind of a mess. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for your feedback. We appreciate it. Ursula Sack?
Good evening. My name is Ursula Sack, and I'm also with GARD. And I'm here to talk about the issue about general plan amendments. In this case, it seems that there's a reasonable justification and rationale for considering an amendment. And we, of course, will learn more when the Planning Commission has evaluated the proposed project. I was here 2 months ago when you gave another property owner the go-ahead to seek a zone and general plan amendment. In that case, the justification for granting it seemed rather arbitrary. It was a property owner with 2 children who wanted to split his lot so that he could give a parcel to each child. This makes for a very disturbing precedent. It leaves me with 2 questions. First of all, can any property owner with children obtain a general plan amendment just for asking? And then also, does the city have any guidelines delineating the conditions that should be existent in order to grant a general plan amendment? If not, if the city doesn't have such guidelines, it appears to be a good time for the city to develop them. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are our last 2 speakers. So and this is tonight preliminary. It's a preliminary proposal, right? So and it's going to come back to Planning Commission, back to us again at another time for more specifics.
That's correct.
This is just for the zoning change. Okay, so we'll start with Councilmember Rigby.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I did meet with the developer last week to talk about this project, but that's a very good question about guest parking spaces. I'm looking at the overview, and I only see 4 in the plan. Do we know what a requisite number of spaces would be?
So it would depend on the number of bedrooms in each unit would determine the number of guest parking spaces. I believe for a 2-bedroom, it's 2.5 spaces per unit. For a 3-bedroom, it's 3 spaces per unit, and a half of each of those spaces is for guests. So in this case, I believe 4, we haven't verified the numbers, but before the application got a staff recommendation, we would need to verify that they meet our current parking standards.
We do have that laid out in our plan and zone, so I'm confident that we will make that number, because I know for me that's always been an issue, and I appreciate our speakers bringing it up, but that's always been very important as somebody whose neighborhood frequently gets run over by other people's cars from the neighborhood down the street. So I appreciate that. I have talked a lot over the years about housing, and we've all had the conversation about the housing stock in Vista and what we need. And this comes to one of the things that I have always said. I don't want us to concentrate so much in one area of type of housing. I think we need different types of housing. We need different levels of housing and entry-level housing, et cetera. And I think this is a good fit for the housing stock in Vista that we would like to see. This gives This gives options for families, for new families just starting out that don't necessarily want to live in a high-density apartment building. So I actually like this, and we had this conversation. So I'm not coming at this from a no at all. I think this is a good fit, and I think it still marries up with what is going to be happening in that neighborhood, in that part of town. So I'm okay with this. I'm good with this. And if you're not looking for a motion, I won't make one. But if you, okay, so I won't make one. But I'm good with this. I think this is actually going to add to what we're looking for in Vista.
Councilmember Contreras.
You know, the only issues that I see with it are really outside the scope of this project, which I have vocalized behind closed doors. And again, it's Old Taylor Street, the intersection with East Vista Way is just really not good. Then we got our fire station there. I have issues using it. And I'm one of the people that frequently uses Old Taylor. So I hear you on that one. And, you know, at the end of the day, it is outside of the scope of this, but this project definitely will have some impact on it. So I don't know if there's some kind of grant or something that we can do to help speed up fixing East Vista Way. There's no ability to cross. There's no mid-block crossing, and I constantly see people trying to, you know, race between cars. So I just want to make sure that this is something that we can address sooner rather than later, especially because we continue to add density in this very same area that has all these, you know, pre-existing conditions. So if we could really figure out a way to speed that up, make it safer for pedestrians, it might be, I don't know if it's more feasible to make it safer for pedestrians first, or if it's more feasible to, you know, make it easier for vehicles, or even if they're mutually exclusive. I don't know, but I just know it's a problem, and we seriously need to address it. Because we're going to see a lot more density come in. But I'm in favor of this project. You know, it is the diversity in housing stock that we desperately want and need in the city. My understanding is that these will not be for sale. Is that correct? These will be rental. And that there will be improvements, like a sidewalk that doesn't currently exist. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, in combination with the other project right next door. So it'll be nice to fill some of the gaps there for pedestrian safety. But yeah, just that intersection of Old Taylor and East Vista Way, we have to do something about that sooner rather than later. But outside of that, I think this is a good project, and it does fit in. It's consistent with what's going there and what is currently there. The last question that I have is, and I forget the term, but it's the calculation of vehicles entering and exiting. I totally forgot what the term is. Do we anticipate that it will be more or less?
Based on the commercial use of the site, we feel like it'll probably be close to equal what the amount of traffic is that's there now, but we still have to evaluate that in a formal application.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Councilmember Green.
All right, Old Taylor Cut Through Road, like it. So yeah, I met with this developer as well, and initially I always like to aggressively attack developers when I sit down with them with all of my traffic concerns and pedestrian concerns and all that good stuff. So hopefully I did a good job aggressively harassing you. When all was said and done, we did kind of talk like Councilwoman Contreras said, is that the projects need to come together for the pedestrian safety. And if you're familiar with that road, if you do build a sidewalk, you'll notice that takes away the people from parking on the dirt on the side side of the road. Therefore, my recommendation is moving forward, and hopefully the Planning Commission will as well, kind of moving into all this, is that we take away that street parking on Old Taylor, because that road is so skinny that you can't have good sidewalks and cars and two-way traffic. It's just not a big enough road. So I do want to make sure that that is thrown out there, that the neighbors are notified that we want to take away the parking on that street, because it will make it to where when people do cut through, at least it'll be safe for people. The other thing is, like Councilman Contreras pointed out, and also the guard folks, thank you guys for coming. There is a huge bottleneck, as you know, getting out of town right there. And it's kind of tough for our fire department to get out at peak hours because that area is not clear. Since we're going to have a 50-unit apartment complex coming in on that corner as well with this, I'd like to recommend some type of clear section so that my fire department can exit there after we build all these houses and more traffic comes in. Maybe a direct access to like a left-hand turn lane or something if they have to blaze down towards Barsby or Osborne to, it's an at-risk fire area. I never want them to be trapped there and have to take Old Taylor back to New Taylor and then make a left, and then they're stuck in that traffic. So I know long-winded, but yes, safety is my main concern with this project. As far as what it provides a fantastic housing element for our community, exactly what we need, something that's going to help affect our arena numbers without really having a huge focused impact. But I appreciate you being willing to work with the other developers in the area on the pedestrian aspect of it and also the safety aspect. But this is definitely something that I'm going to support moving forward and make sure that we just mitigate all the traffic and pedestrian safety of all of the, developments together. Thank you so much.
Deputy Mayor.
I think I agree with most everything that Councilman Green said. I just want to reiterate that this is what we call an early design review for all of the people watching at home, all 7 of them. I know that's 4 times as many as there really are. But I do think it's important because oftentimes people are confused that we're approving the project at this point. What we're really saying is we're not an automatic no, so we invite you to go through the entire formal process. And I certainly would invite you to go through the process with the Planning Commission and don't see myself to be opposed to the concept. I would agree there needs to be sufficient parking. I like your idea about removing the on-street parking. Projects need to be parked on site. We've made some mistakes in the past, in past decades. Nobody that works here now was responsible for it, but we've made some mistakes and we didn't force projects to be parked fully. In some places you can see we overreacted to that and made people build way more parking, but we have to get the parking right because the cars must not be allowed to spill out onto the streets. Streets are for driving and for walking and for bicycling, not for car parking. You take your land and you park it. That needs to be our philosophy. So as long as we get that right and we mitigate the other things and you make this thing gorgeous for the neighborhood and you build some nice quality housing, then I'm generally supportive of it.
I'm supportive of it also, and so we're all for it. We don't need a motion. It's just information tonight. Right?
That's sufficient direction. Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate it.
I do have one last question, if I may, Madam Mayor. Talking about, we have a rule that you have to have your development parked, self-parking, but that doesn't seem to work for a lot of our apartments, and I understand this is a rental property. And that's how we have situations along Breeze Hill and Pomelo and some of these other areas where they should have enough parking for the number of units they have, but the people who are living in the units are there's a higher density in each unit than they were built for. So that would be something that we need to address on how you would mitigate that, because if you have, you have 12 units, you've got 2 bedrooms, mom and dad, a kid or 2, you're thinking maybe 2 cars, but if you get extra people living there, you're going to end up with 3 cars, 4 cars. Where are they going to go? That's going to be something I'm going to want to look at in the future when this comes back to us. So to keep it from happening, we don't want Breeze Hill, Pomelo, and Taylor and all that happening again. So that's why we have all those cars in my neighborhood and they don't live there. They are apartment people who are parking there.
Okay, with that, you have enough information, right?
Thank you.
Okay, with that, we'll move on to our last discussion item, fiscal year 2018-19 fourth quarter financial report. Our finance director, Mike Silvio, will provide our staff report.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, City Council members. Before I get into my overview of this item, I wanted to let you all know, as well as our audience here and those watching at home, there is a typo on page 1 in our narrative. Under the statement on the subject, in the first sentence where there's the $85 million figure, that should be $86,780,197. And that change alters the second number in the second sentence in that same paragraph to from 86,734,711 to $88,264,042. The revenue total is correct in Exhibit 2 on page 9 and within our financial system. It was just a hasty oversight on the narrative piece, but I wanted to definitely state it for the record. So with that, this is the fiscal year 18-19 fourth quarter report. Provides a summary in comparison of the general fund budget to actual results for the current and the prior years ending June 30th. Total general fund revenues, I actually just told it to you, was $86.78 million compared to $81.03 in the prior year, which is an increase of approximately 7%. Actual results across the entire fund were about 10% above or favorable to the city's projected revenue budget. And specific to a couple of line items, property tax and sales tax are the city's two largest sources of revenue. Those revenue sources were up by 2.7 and 2% respectively over budget. Exhibit 2 on page 10 of the agenda report provides additional narrative detail of other revenue components that are worth noting. Switching over to general fund expenditures, they were within budgetary projections at $77.6 million. And we're happy to report all departments and divisions came in under their respective operating budgets. It was pretty consistent with the prior year at $77.9 million. It is worth noting these figures are still subject to auditor adjustment. Our city finance staff is working with the auditors right now on the fiscal 18-19 comprehensive annual financial report that we are planning having completion by the end of December. Also, the agenda report includes recommendations of future uses of $4.36 million of available general fund year-end fund balance. That's detailed on page 2 of the agenda report. A couple of highlights on that list. It includes just under $1.9 million, which is an increase to the general fund emergency reserves. It would bring that total up to $23.6 million, or about 31% of the fiscal year 19-20 general fund operating budget. This does move the city closer to the city council goal of 35% of operating reserves. Number 2 is another $500,000 contribution to the general fund update. This funding set aside is for the general plan update that's scheduled to occur within the next 2 to 3 years. Number 3 is $160,000 for the gym floor replacement at the Jim Porter Rec Center in Bringle Terrace Park. Number 4 is the purchase of traffic equipment, including driver feedback and flashing beacons, as well as LED signs. This is to continue the effort to improvement of traffic flow and reduction to congestion, improve roadway and sideway access for citizens. And number 5 is $100,000 towards the facade improvement program, which would continue assisting business owners to enhance their business facades in areas that a facelift is needed. So with that, the recommendation is to receive and file the fiscal year 18-19 fourth quarter financial report and adopt the resolution of the city amending the operating budgets for fiscal years 19-20 and 2021. And I'm available for questions.
Councilmember Rigby.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for this report. I like seeing this, that we have money at the end of the year that we can use. And I want to say, first off, thank you to my colleagues and to city staff, our city manager, because we are in a good position and we have been steadily increasing our reserves. When I got here, it was single digit. And now we're looking really good, unlike some other entities in our region that are not looking so good and are struggling. So I say thank you very much to the council and to staff for being fiscally responsible for our community. It's important that we take seriously when we do things because we are using other people's money. We are using taxpayer monies. And this is money that our taxpayers have worked very, very hard to earn for us. And I appreciate that very much. So kudos to everybody. I want to say thank you to that. And bringing up our emergency reserves, that's one of the items on our council goals. So I appreciate that very much. The only other thing I want to say on this is the facade improvement program. I'm glad we're putting additional monies into that. And I was joking with Patrick. I was a little disappointed to see how much money we're putting into those blinking signs on the road because those blinking signs are really annoying at night. But then again, there's a reason they blink. But anyway, this is a good job, and thank you very much for this. And with that, Madam Mayor, I would move that we adopt the amending the operating budget for 2020 and 2021. And is that's including these items, I'm thinking? Okay, so I would make a motion that we approve this as presented.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, and I would second everything that Councilwoman Rigby said. We have made impressive gains in the last 5 years in our emergency reserves, and in the next economic downturn, we will not be in the same place that we were in the last one because of our planning. And I'm fully advocate that we continue to go down the road that we are by setting money aside while we've got it so that when the rainy day comes, we're prepared. I think we had projected surplus of, I think the number was $29,000 in the last budget we approved. Is that right? How much of these year-end funds defray or add to that proposed surplus? In other words, of these things that we're spending the $4.359 million on, how many of those are coming out of the budget that had the $29,000 surplus that we?
There are none.
None of them are.
No, these are all like one-time expenditures.
Yeah.
But I will say that and I've mentioned it to you when we had our individual meetings, that we do have some revenues that are up. And so we would we're going to evaluate those revenues in the coming quarter and then make a recommendation to you in a future quarterly report to increase some of those revenues in the budget to offset and increase that $29,000, or, as some of you have said publicly, to take the reliance off of the cannabis money that we use to help balance the budget this year. So the goal would be to eliminate that for this year.
Yeah, that certainly would be nice, and that's kind of what I'm getting at, is making sure that we're doing everything possible to widen the gap so that we know that we've got a surplus. I think we all want to end every year with a surplus, not a deficit, unless there's something externally happening with the economy, and we're not the only ones suffering. But that's an important thing. We all want to bring the ship in with enough gas left in the tank to get there. So appreciate your good work.
Yeah, and a number of these items, as I mentioned, are one-time monies that are not relied upon in future years. But there are a few where we've seen increases to franchise fees and potentially property tax. So we'll bring that back to you in the future.
Good, thank you. Oh, and I would second the motion.
Okay, seeing no other discussion, I would, vote, right? Yes, okay. Cast your votes, please. That motion passes unanimously. That brings us to our oral communications. And I think we have We have five speakers for oral communications. So I'll call your name if you line up over here on the side. I would appreciate that. So it's Maria Lopez, followed by Martha, looks like Bolognese, followed by Kathleen Boyle. Maria, are you Maria? No. Is Maria here? Maria Lopez. Are you Maria Lopez? Oh, okay. Welcome.
Hola, mi nombre es María López y
Would you like me to translate? I don't think we have an interpreter. Okay.
Okay, mi nombre es María López
My name is Maria Lopez,
y les quería dar las gracias a todos.
and I wanted to thank all of you.
Karina Contreras porque
Karina Contreras
arregló las calles
as
de
well,
Townside.
because she's fixing the streets in Townsite.
Gracias por lo que están haciendo ustedes. Tengo 4 años que vine a vivir a Vista y veo que está mejorando la comunidad de Vista.
She wants to thank all of the council because in the 4 years that she's been in Vista, she has seen a significant difference and it is getting much better.
Les doy las gracias y también les pido un favor, si están en sus manos de ustedes.
She wants to thank us, but she also wants to ask a favor of us.
Hacer cero tolerancia para los cigarrillos, para nuestros jóvenes, nuestros niños, los estamos perdiendo. Veo mucho joven saliendo de la escuela con cigarrillos, muy pequeños los niños.
She would like zero tolerance on cigarettes.
De middle school, high school, y necesitamos hacer algo.
Because she sees too many students using cigarettes.
Hay un parque que está por donde está la escuela Academy, la Vista Academy. Hay un parque de patinetas. Ese parque es de patinetas, pero solo están tomando, fumando.
There's a lot of problems at the skate park where there's a lot of drinking that's happening.
Necesitamos hacer algo por
And we need to do something
jóvenes.
for our youth.
Es lo que les pido. O sea, ellos son el futuro de nuestro país, de nuestro mundo.
That's what she's asking of this council, to please help
Los tenemos
because
que
they
ayudar.
are our future.
Yo tengo hijos, tengo 8
She has 8
hijos
children.
y están pequeños, unos medianos,
Some are young, some are
pero
mid-age.
Dios nos dio hijos para que sean alguien en este país.
But God gave us children so that they could become something great,
Así como ustedes que están aquí,
just how we are here.
en un futuro yo quiero ver muchos jóvenes así.
In the future, she would like to see a lot of our youth
Pero tenemos
have
que
the
hacer algo
opportunities to grow like
por
us.
ellos. Pues eso es todo. Quiero darles las gracias a ustedes porque me escucharon. Gracias porque me escuchan y soy de una iglesia y trato siempre de estar en la calle hablándole a todos del amor de Dios, ¿verdad? Entonces los invito a que me ayuden.
She wants to, again, just say thank you so much for what the council's been doing and for listening to her, and that she belongs, she's very involved in her church, and she is often reaches out to individuals, just on a daily basis when she's going to and fro on the street. She just, again, wants to thank the council for the improvements that she has seen in Vista, and if we're able to help with the situation of our youth of using things that they shouldn't be using.
Gracias. Gracias.
Gracias. Muchas gracias. Que tengas una buena noche.
Thank you. Martha Bolognese. Somebody needs to help her with a microphone.
Should I talk in English?
Wait just a minute, Martha.
Thank you.
There, so you can talk right there.
Maybe on the side. Okay.
Okay, I wanna thank you guys for having me here
like I spent like 25 years like in this city, and I'm always like asking for you guys to help me fix like the walls and stuff, but they never listen to me. So like, and she was the one helped me to fix the walls. So the thing that I wanna ask you guys is for more light at North Santa Fe, that I'm always going like out in the night, that I'm walking and stuff. So they do not have like a light like on the streets and like on the grass lights, like the cars never respect me. They always like go when I'm supposed to go. So they always want to run me over, like on the like crosswalks. So I don't know if you guys could put something, or just to respect people, not only me. So like well, and then the other thing is like they like Vista has like a lot of homeless too. Like that's a scary part. Like when I'm out, like there's like a lot of homeless people like trying to hold me, or and that's like something else. Like I don't know if you guys could put like police or something just to check out the streets, Well, that's it. And I give you guys the things that you guys fix the sidewalks, because I'm was the only that having problems going on the sidewalks, but you guys already fixed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Kathleen Boyle and Becky Rapp, and Matt, followed by Matt.
That's hard to follow. Good evening. With all due respect, I just wanted to say that people in Vista don't like the Paseo Arch. Sorry. It doesn't always work that if they build it, they will come. Paseo Santa Fe is not a thing, and I think putting up big arches is not going to make it be a thing. Maybe someday. I would bet Councilmember Rigby, who mentioned Lucadia last meeting, that Lucadia didn't put up that Cedros district sign until there was already a buzz happening on that street. And there's only one sign, and it's small. It probably cost $100. When people learn the cost of an unneeded second arch, they will be horrified and resent the expenditure of taxpayer money. Vista's not a rich city. There's so much we could do with $250,000. Pedestrian safety, lights, we just heard a lot of things. What I wanted to say tonight was consider trees. Some reasons for trees. Nothing adds more charm to a city than tree-lined streets. According to the traffic engineer consultant who worked on the traffic improvement project, tree-lined streets slow traffic. People feel like they are somewhere, not that they have to get somewhere. Trees provide shade so pedestrians can have a better walk. Trees cool the surrounding ambience and could lower the temperature of a city by 10 degrees. We have many people in Vista who don't have air conditioning who suffer in the summer. Trees sequester CO2. They trap the CO2. Real trees, not those palm trees you're putting on the Paseo. So charm, slowing traffic, shade, cooling, trapping CO2. That's a lot of good reasons for trees. I participated in the traffic project planning, and at every pass, respondents asked for trees. But when the final plan came out, there were no trees, and city staff told me we couldn't afford trees. I think we can. with the $350,000. Well, what about a Vista sign? Not an arch, but a sign. Councilmember Contreras pointed out that young people, I'm not one of them, but the minute she said it, I got it. People like to take pictures of themselves, yes. And I thought of other cities where I've been where they have the city name spelled out in letters on the ground, on street level. And they take photos and they poke their heads through the O or whatever it is. They have their babies there. If there's an I in the city name, they stand there like the I. We have an I, and we have a short name, so it wouldn't cost very much. We could have a contest among the high school shop classes and have a cool sign made from sheet metal for a couple of $100. Or if you want to spend more money, maybe a 3D sign like that one in Bringle Terrace that says America. So if you want to spend $1,000, you could do that, but not hundreds of thousands of dollars. And put the Vista sign where the people are, somewhere downtown, not where the people aren't. Thank you.
Thank you. Becky Rapp, followed by Matt, followed by Louisa Stafford.
Good evening, City Council. As a parent of young adults and a public health educator, I am concerned by the recent study regarding the connection between marijuana advertising and marijuana use by young adults. I have a handout for you guys to read. One of the unintentional and unanticipated consequences of permitting marijuana businesses is the rampant and predatory advertising that comes with it. It becomes very difficult to eliminate and restrict its enticing promotions, especially in the area of social media. We have overburdened code enforcement personnel, and the very brick and mortar presence of a marijuana storefront indicates approval of drug use. As the study reports, we know that the human brain is an exquisite yet delicate instrument that is not fully developed until the age of 25. This makes adolescents especially susceptible to industry manipulation and addiction. Lawmakers have banned the marketing of tobacco products to children for this very reason. Today's potent strains of marijuana rob youth of their motivation, diminish their cognitive abilities, and keep them from reaching their full potential. Could I respectfully ask the City Council to investigate possible code enforcement regulations and actions that can be taken to protect this vulnerable population sooner rather than later from the advertising from our marijuana storefronts? As I know from my parents who live in San Diego, the city has tried to eliminate marijuana billboards from youth-sensitive areas for 5 years and still don't have the draft regulations passed yet. The billboard's glaring presence as you enter San Diego from either I-15 or I-5 is a very unfortunate introduction to the city. Hopefully Vista can do better. Thank you.
Matt, followed by Louisa Stafford.
Hello, City Council. I don't know if you can see because it might be like blocked by the furthest spotlight up on the top right. But one of those lights is out, it's kind of like blinking. It'd be nice to fix that up, but on second look, it's way up there and really hard to get to, so I understand if it can't be fixed. But speaking of more important lights, North Santa Fe is definitely a dark street. Yeah, if we could do something there, that would be very helpful. Getting back to the homelessness discussion, that was a really good discussion tonight. Since there's such a long way to go, I would hope that you just work on issues that you all agree on. It's a great starting place. I think a lot of the issues of homelessness aren't really put onto any one city because they're regional, they're much larger. So I really look to the county as being responsible for a lot of these issues, and perhaps Vista can sort of budget for sort of Vista-specific homeless individual issues and kind of rely or expect the county to take sort of more responsibility for what they're responsible for in terms of budget. Thank you.
Louisa Stafford.
Good evening. I hope you don't mind me reading it because I had to write this between meetings tonight.
It's fine. It's okay to read.
So it appears that the SRO are a victim of the district budget crisis. Their presence on campus is vital to maintain a positive connection between kids and cops. It helps kids and the school and the community to have their presence ensure a faster response of the worst-case scenario that can happen in a school. Yes, enforcement is a piece of the puzzle, but truly a small percentage. Often the positive interaction, person to person, between kids and cops on campus is the only positive interaction kids may have with the PD. Take that away, Take that away, and more division with the cops and the kids will happen. What happen? It will grow in a general community. On the enforcement side, when the deputy knows that the whole child from school, not the juvenile suspect on the streets, the rest is history, has a much better chance to be intervention rather than cold incarceration. In my opinion, the SRO on campus are essential to the entire community-based policy idea, which I believe is essential to closing the growing division in our country. Please, I know it's a very hard decision, but consider this and put it on your agenda and let us come and talk to you. It's very important. We can't get it from the district. Maybe you guys can understand it better. Thank you.
Thank you. That's our last speaker this evening, and so the next thing we'll do is our remarks, and I have my little mayor's comments here. So starting Monday, November 18th, the city will begin collecting new unwrapped toys and gift cards for our adopted Marine Corps unit, HMLA 369. The holiday gifts will help support the Marine family members while the troops are. Oh my gosh, it's been too long tonight. I'm going to start this again. The holiday gifts will help support the Marines' family members while the troops are overseas, and I know they're getting deployed on Wednesday morning, so the families are going to be alone over the holidays. So you can drop off gifts here at the Vista Civic Center in the lobby through December 20th. And the next thing, last February, our city was featured in an episode of a new TV series called Encore with Christian Bell, which is part of the new Disney Plus streaming service. Episode 1 of Encore features the original cast of the 1996 Santana High School production of Annie, recreating their performance 23 years later. They spent a week filming in Vista, using our Avo and Moonlight as their main sites, but other parts of the city are also included. So if you have the Disney Plus service, please check it out. And lastly, the city has completed an update to the Climate Action Plan, now available for review online at cityofvista.com. 2 public meetings will be held here at the Civic Center to present the plan and to gather input. The meeting dates are November 14th and December 5th at 6 p.m. That's for the Climate Action Plan. And so with that, I'll start with Councilmember Rigby.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First off, I do want to say thank you to my colleagues for a great conversation tonight on the homeless issue. Even with the discussions that we had tonight and the previous week's discussions, we really are just barely hitting the tip of the iceberg on this. There is so much to go into, so much to think about, so much that we can do here and so much that we cannot do at this level. But this is a really great start, and it's a positive step for our community. So I want to say thank you for that, and for staff for all that you're doing also on that topic. I want to say congratulations to Vista High School. I was out there along with Karina and Joe the other night, so Friday night, Saturday night, I forget. We're all over. They did a great job with their annual Vista Invitational tournament for the band tournament, and it was very successful. And to show how much this program has grown, we have schools from all over, even north of Los Angeles, that come down for this to compete. They did a really great job. And Vista, being the host school, is not eligible for awards because they're the host school, but Rancho Buena Vista rocked the house, and they took home multiple awards. So huge shout out also to RBV, and congratulations for their awards. And then my last thing is I want to say thank you to several members of our city staff for helping with a special project that we had this week. Thank you very, very much. And I know that our gunfighters thank you very, very much as well. So that's all from me. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Deputy Mayor? Councilmember Green.
Two things. Number one, I want to thank Fire Chief Ned Vanderpool and his Vista firefighters for having me along on a ride along on Saturday, and they actually graced us with their presence at the field tournament, which was pretty cool. So it was awesome hanging out with them. The other thing is North Coast Church volunteers will be installing Christmas lights in Vista, along with our young Marines for the 8th year. And when you go down and the town's lit up, just know that we have great community organizations that partner with our city that work hard to keep it beautiful. Also like to thank all 5 of you who made it all 3 hours and 20 minutes tonight. You are awesome, and also our sheriff's deputies in the back for keeping us safe this evening. Hope you guys all have a great rest of your Taco Tuesday. I understand they're still serving in restaurants in Vista.
Councilmember Contreras.
Yeah, I just want to echo what was already said. I think we had a really good discussion today, really touching upon some extremely important topics. And I have a trash walk that I do every Wednesday, so everybody's invited. We start at Luz Duran Park. We start getting together between 8:30 and 8:50. We talk about, where in the neighborhood we need to go pick up trash. That's not too far because we got to walk there and then walk back. And then we start walking at around 9 a.m. So that's every single Wednesday at Luz Duran. Please feel free to come and join in on the fun. And I do have a upcoming town hall December 4th. Doors open at 6 p.m. The town hall starts at 6:30 at the Linda Rhodes Center. Again, that's December 4th. It is going to be a discussion panel on youth and young adult homelessness. It's going to not be a place for you to come and be YIMBY versus NIMBY. It is just an opportunity to come and listen to individuals with lived experience and individuals that work with this population on a daily basis. With that, I hope everybody has a really good night. And I'm really starting to feel hungry now. So I think I need to get something to eat after this.
City Manager Patrick Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. City offices in the Vista Library will be closed in observance of Thanksgiving holiday on November 28th and 29th. So trash pickup, will be delayed one day if your trash is picked up on Thursday or Friday. As a result of Thanksgiving, there will be no City Council meeting on November 26th. So our next meeting will be December 10th, which will be the last meeting of the calendar year. And prior to that December 10th meeting, on December 7th is the Chamber Holiday Parade at 1 o'clock in downtown. And I just wanted to wish a belated happy birthday to Joe Green on November 2nd. And then to Councilwoman Rigby, her birthday is on Friday. So happy birthday to you. 29. Oh, 18. Sorry, 18.
How about our city attorney? Daryl Biper, do you have anything tonight?
Well, yes. Happy birthday to the birthday persons, and happy Thanksgiving to everyone.
Thank you. How about our city clerk, Kathy or Claire? Nothing? Okay. Wish everybody happy Thanksgiving. But the Holiday Homes Tour also is December 8th, right after the parade, the day after the parade. So if everybody knows that. So for Vista Community Clinic. So happy Thanksgiving, everyone, and I will see you again soon. We are adjourned.